Beneath the dust of time and the silence of ruins lie questions that have never been answered. Why do ancient maps depict lands that shouldn't exist? Who engineered monoliths with such precision that modern tools can barely replicate them? And what secrets were whispered into stone by civilizations whose names we barely remember? Across deserts, beneath oceans, and hidden in the forgotten corners of once great empires, from the jungles of Central America to the shadowed caves beneath Palestine, there are remnants that defy explanation. Symbols etched where no one should have reached. Skeletons buried in ways that rewrite our understanding of the past. And whispers of knowledge that someone, somewhere, wanted us to forget. These aren't fairy tales or the fantasies of conspiracy theorists. These are real enigmas, and they've haunted historians, archaeologists, and truth seekers for centuries. Because the past isn't dead, it's just hiding. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of historical mysteries that will give you chills. What you're about to see may change the way you view history, forever. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the ancient streets of Alexandria. Wind stirs the sand between broken columns and crumbling stones, where history seems to hum just beneath the surface. Somewhere beneath this modern Egyptian city, hidden beneath centuries of dust, construction, and shifting regimes, may lie one of the most elusive relics of the ancient world, the body of Alexander the Great. The man who carved an empire stretching from the mountains of Macedonia to the plains of India disappeared. Not his legacy, not his name, but his actual remains, once entombed with great ceremony, vanished from history without a trace. How does a man so larger than life simply vanish? When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC, he was just 32 years old. The cause of his death remains hotly debated. Some say it was typhoid fever. Others suspect poisoning, perhaps by one of his own generals. Still others propose exotic explanations: autoimmune disorders, malaria, or even slow organ failure brought on by wounds, alcohol, and stress. Yet in many ways, the real mystery began after his death. According to ancient sources, Alexander's body did not decay for several days after he died, a sign, some believed, that he was divine. Whether that's poetic exaggeration or a factual observation remains unclear. But the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus reports that preparations began to bring the body back to Macedonia, to rest in the royal tombs of his ancestors in Aegae. That never happened. The funeral cortege, a massive golden temple-like carriage reportedly drawn by 64 mules, began its journey westward from Babylon. But somewhere en route, the body's destination changed. It was hijacked. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most powerful generals, and later the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, diverted the procession. He seized Alexander's body and brought it to Egypt instead. Some accounts suggest it was first buried in Memphis, the old capital. But later, perhaps decades later, it was reburied in Alexandria, the city Alexander himself had founded. Here, in this grand coastal capital, a tomb was constructed. And for centuries, Alexander's resting place was not only known, but revered. Roman emperors visited it. Julius Caesar is said to have wept before the body. Augustus placed flowers upon it. Caligula reportedly stole Alexander's breastplate. Septimius Severus sealed the tomb. And then, silence. By the time of the late Roman period, the tomb's location was already lost. The historian John Chrysostom, writing in the 4th century AD, noted that even his tomb is unknown. How could the body of one of the most famous men in history be so completely lost? The reasons are layered and complex. Political instability, earthquakes, changes in dynasties and religious beliefs. The rise of Christianity in Alexandria likely played a role, as the new faith often sought to erase or replace older pagan legacies. Fires, riots, and repeated invasions over centuries may have erased physical landmarks. But the trail is not entirely cold. In the early 20th century, excavations and urban development in Alexandria revealed numerous subterranean chambers and Hellenistic-era tombs. Some researchers believe the tomb might still lie buried beneath the modern city, perhaps underneath a mosque, a church, or even an apartment building. Others have focused on the area near the ancient Soma district, once known to house royal burials. Then there are the more speculative theories. Some believe the body was moved, secretly and deliberately. According to one medieval Islamic tradition, Alexander's remains lie in a glass coffin somewhere in Alexandria, hidden from view. Other legends claim the body was relocated to Constantinople, or even to Venice. Some researchers in the early 20th century speculated that St. Mark's body, enshrined in Venice's basilica, might actually be Alexander's, mistakenly or deliberately re-identified during the chaos of early Christian history. Still others turn to more esoteric ideas. Some claim the tomb lies beneath the waters of the Mediterranean, sealed away by a sudden seismic event. Others whisper of hidden chambers under the great library of Alexandria, or what's left of it. One fringe theory even suggests that the body was taken to the east, hidden away by descendants of Alexander's eastern subjects who viewed him not as a conqueror, but as a demigod. There is no proof, only fragments, hints. In 1995, a Greek archaeologist claimed to have found the tomb beneath a church in Alexandria. In 2021, another team proposed that a structure uncovered near Siwa Oasis, where Alexander once consulted the Oracle of Amun, may have been his final burial place, yet none of these claims have been definitively proven. Perhaps the body is still there, somewhere beneath the layered chaos of Alexandria, entombed beneath centuries of conquest and rebuilding. Perhaps it was desecrated during the invasions, its remains scattered and lost. Or perhaps it rests in a place no one has thought to look, sealed away with a knowledge now extinct. If Alexander was more than a man, if he was, as many believed, touched by the gods, then perhaps his fate was never meant to be fully known. Maybe the story was always designed to vanish, just like the man himself. In the quiet hours of Alexandria's night, when the city is hushed and the waves brush gently against its battered shores, one can almost imagine the outline of something just below the surface, an echo of grandeur, a silent question whispered into time. Where is Alexander the Great? And more importantly, why was he hidden? The answer, it seems, still lies buried, waiting to be found. The sun rises slowly over the Egyptian coast, casting its golden light across the restless waters of the Mediterranean. In the haze of dawn, the modern skyline of Alexandria flickers with life, but it is the layers beneath that whisper of something lost. Buried somewhere beneath this city of dust and stone once stood a monument to human ambition, knowledge, and wonder. A place where the thoughts of the ancient world were gathered in one sacred space. A sanctuary of scrolls, secrets, and unimaginable wisdom. The Library of Alexandria. More than a building, it was an idea. A dream made real by the Ptolemaic kings who sought to collect, copy, and preserve every text, every fragment, every known piece of writing in existence. Founded in the early 3rd century BC, likely during the reign of Ptolemy I or his son Ptolemy II, the library was not simply a repository of Greek literature. It was global in its scope. Historians believe it held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perhaps even over 500,000, works in Greek, Persian, Egyptian, Hebrew, Babylonian, and Sanskrit. Scientific treatises, philosophical dialogues, historical accounts, plays, maps, anatomical diagrams, astronomical calculations, texts from the ancient temples of Memphis and Thebes, translations of sacred Indian texts, lost epics of Mesopotamia, records from Carthage, Ethiopia, and ancient Palestine. But none of it remains. What was in the library of Alexandria, and what exactly happened to it? The mystery is not simply in what was lost, but how it was allowed to disappear so completely. The accounts we have are fragmented, contradictory, and riddled with uncertainty. One version of the story blames Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, during his campaign in Egypt, Caesar set fire to the ships in Alexandria's harbor to block enemy advances. The flames spread inland. According to the Roman historian Plutarch, this accidental fire destroyed part of the library. But was that the end? Others believe the destruction came later. In the 3rd century AD, during the reign of Emperor Aurelian, the city was torn apart by civil war. Portions of the royal quarter, where the library was likely housed, were demolished. Still more damage may have occurred under Emperor Theophilus in 391 AD, as Christian mobs ransacked pagan temples across Alexandria. Some suspect that the final blow came with the Arab conquest of the city in the 7th century. But in truth, no single event can be definitively identified as the moment the library was lost. Perhaps it was not a singular catastrophe, but a slow unraveling, scroll by scroll, fire by fire, war by war. Like water slipping through fingers, the knowledge simply faded. And yet, there are whispers, hints that something may have survived. Some believe parts of the collection were moved before the destruction, that copies of rare works were sent to other libraries, perhaps to Pergamon, to Constantinople, or hidden in desert monasteries. There are claims that private collectors, philosophers, and priests may have taken fragments, safeguarding them in silence. One legend suggests that a secret archive, containing a portion of the Alexandrian scrolls, lies buried beneath the sands near the Siwa oasis, guarded by the followers of a forgotten mystery cult. Other theories reach further still. Some fringe researchers speculate that scrolls from the library were spirited away to the east, possibly reaching India or even China, where ancient records reference visits from Greco-Egyptian scholars during that era. Still others look to the Vatican archives, vast, sealed, and mysterious, as a potential hiding place for surviving remnants. And among certain esoteric circles, there are whispers of a hidden vault beneath the old library of St. Catherine in the Sinai Peninsula, where ancient texts may lie untouched for centuries. It's easy to dismiss such ideas as fanciful. And yet, what if even a fraction of it is true? What if there are lost manuscripts still waiting to be discovered? Scrolls that detail technologies forgotten, philosophies erased, or histories rewritten by the victors of war. The idea is not so far-fetched when we consider what was already lost. Among the known victims of the library's disappearance are the complete works of Aristotle's dialogues, volumes of Heraclitus and Democritus, treatises by Anaximander and Anaxagoras, the lost comedies of Aristophanes, the complete histories of Berossus, the Babylonian priest who documented thousands of years of Mesopotamian history, the mysterious texts of the Orphic cults, accounts from Phoenician sailors who may have mapped the African coastline long before European exploration, perhaps even earlier drafts of the Old Testament, or competing versions that never survived the editorial hands of later scribes. And what of the technological marvels? The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek computer recovered from a shipwreck, suggests an advanced understanding of gears, cycles, and celestial patterns. Could more of these devices have existed? Were their blueprints once shelved in the quiet halls of the library, now turned to ash. When we imagine the Library of Alexandria, we must imagine not only what it held, but what its survival might have meant. Would history have unfolded differently had that knowledge endured? Could ancient medicine have advanced centuries earlier? Could wars have been prevented? Or would we merely have known more, while still making the same human mistakes? The silence of the library speaks loudly. It reminds us that knowledge is not immortal, that what seems permanent can vanish, that great ideas, if not protected, can be lost with terrifying ease. And perhaps that's the true mystery. Not just what was lost, but why it was allowed to vanish. What knowledge did we fear? What truths were inconvenient? And could some of it still be hidden, waiting, like embers beneath the ashes, for someone to uncover what remains? As the waves of Alexandria lap against ancient stone, the question lingers, quiet, unresolved, haunting. What did the Library of Alexandria truly contain? And will we ever know? Along the windswept shores of the eastern Mediterranean, the tide washes against ruins that once bore the weight of kingdoms. Stone walls, now broken and half buried in sand, whisper of a time when the great cities of the Bronze Age flourished, only to fall, almost all at once. Ugarit, Hattusa, Mycenae, and cities across Egypt, Cyprus, and ancient Palestine crumbled into ruin around the 12th century BC. And behind this collapse, carved into the walls of Egyptian temples and preserved in cryptic fragments of correspondence, looms a shadowy force known only by one name: the Sea Peoples. Who were they? We first hear of the Sea Peoples in Egyptian records, specifically in the inscriptions of Pharaoh Merneptah, and later, the monumental reliefs commissioned by Ramses III. These texts describe violent seaborne invasions that devastated entire regions of the eastern Mediterranean. Their warriors are shown with feathered helmets, round shields, and distinctive ships, swift, powerful, and foreign. According to Ramses III, the Sea Peoples came boldly, sailing in their warships from the midst of the sea. They attacked the Nile Delta with terrifying force around 1177 BC, during what would become one of the most tumultuous centuries in ancient history. Entire civilizations vanished, some never to rise again. But who exactly were these invaders, and where did they come from? Mainstream scholars agree that the Sea Peoples were not a single group, but a confederation of tribes or maritime peoples, possibly displaced or driven to war by drought, famine, natural disasters, or collapsing trade networks. Some of the names preserved in Egyptian inscriptions, like the Sherdun, Shekelesh, Luca, and Peliset, have led researchers to associate them with various regions: Sardinia, Sicily, Anatolia, and the Aegean. Others suggest they were mercenaries, pirates, or refugees, desperate peoples on the move, seeking land, food, and safety in a time of chaos. The collapse of the Hittite Empire and the weakening of Mycenaean Greece suggest a domino effect, a regional catastrophe in which the Sea Peoples were both a symptom and a cause. But even these explanations leave us wanting. There are too many unknowns. If the Sea Peoples were displaced by environmental disaster, why do we see such organized, large-scale invasions? If they were merely pirates, how did they destroy cities fortified for generations? And why did they disappear from history almost as suddenly as they arrived? Some of the mystery lies in the silence that followed. Unlike the Greeks or Egyptians, the Sea Peoples left behind no known written records of their own. No inscriptions, no cities bearing their names, no royal tombs. What we know comes entirely from the perspective of those who fought against them, particularly the Egyptians. It's a historical puzzle viewed only through shattered glass, and yet the impact was undeniable. In just a few decades, the great palatial centers of the Bronze Age collapsed. Trade routes dissolved. Linear bee writing disappeared from Greece. Monumental architecture ceased in the Levant. The entire Mediterranean fell into a kind of dark age. Could the Sea Peoples truly have done all this alone? Some scholars now propose that the term Sea Peoples may be an oversimplification, an Egyptian label for a complex phenomenon. Perhaps what we see is not a single invasion, but the collision of multiple crises: climate change, famine, mass migrations, internal rebellions, and the collapse of trade networks stretching from Mesopotamia to Crete. But that raises another question. Were the Sea Peoples scapegoats? In moments of collapse, ruling powers often seek an external enemy. Could the Egyptians, facing internal strife and ecological pressure, have blamed mysterious foreigners to explain their own faltering grip? Or perhaps the Sea Peoples were not entirely foreign. Some theories suggest they were former allies or vassals of Egypt and the Hittites, turning against their patrons when the balance of power shifted. Then there are the more speculative ideas. One enduring theory links the Sea Peoples to the fabled city of Atlantis, casting them as the remnants of a once great civilization lost to time, now wandering and warring in search of a new homeland. Others point to cultural similarities between the Sea Peoples and early Philistines, who later established settlements along the southern coast of ancient Palestine. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ashkelon and Ekron show a sudden appearance of Mycenaean-style pottery and architecture around this time, suggesting a migration or invasion from across the sea. Still others propose that the Sea Peoples were part of a broader movement of Indo-European tribes, reshaping the ancient world from the Aegean to Mesopotamia. And among fringe circles, there are whispers of a forgotten maritime empire, perhaps from the western Mediterranean or even farther afield, whose disappearance created a shockwave felt across the known world. With every excavation, every unearthed tablet or buried fortress, new pieces of the puzzle emerge. And yet, the identity of the Sea Peoples remains frustratingly elusive. We are left with images carved in stone, warriors on ships, cities in flames, kings recording their narrow escape. Were the Sea Peoples desperate refugees, opportunistic pirates, or the agents of a deeper, more complex collapse? Were they conquerors, or simply survivors of a dying world? And if we still don't know who they were, what else have we lost from that vanished age? As the waves crash quietly along the same Mediterranean shores they once sailed, the question remains, unanswered, compelling, eternal. Who were the Sea Peoples? And what stories lie buried beneath the sands they left behind? The winds move gently over the fields of Suffolk, England. Rolling hills stretch beneath a wide, pale sky, where clouds drift over quiet villages and winding country roads. Here, in the parish of Woolpit, nothing seems out of place. It is pastoral, ordinary, timeless. But in the shadow of this sleepy English landscape lies one of the strangest, most unsettling legends in medieval history. A tale passed down through centuries, enigmatic, incomplete, and chilling. This is the story of the Green Children of Woolpit. The earliest known accounts come from two chroniclers, William of Newburgh, writing in the late 12th century, and Ralph of Coggeshall, a monk from a nearby abbey. Though their details vary, the core narrative is consistent and strange enough to defy easy explanation. Sometime during the reign of King Stephen or Henry II, local villagers in Woolpit discovered two children, brother and sister, standing near one of the deep pits used to trap wolves in the area. They spoke an unknown language. Their clothing was unfamiliar, made from a material that no one could identify, but most striking of all was the color of their skin. It was green. According to the chronicles, the children were taken in by a local landowner, possibly Sir Richard de Calne. At first, they refused all food, unable or unwilling to eat the bread and vegetables offered to them. Days passed, and concern grew. Finally, they were given raw green beans, still in their pods, and, to everyone's astonishment, they devoured them. Only after weeks of careful introduction did they begin to eat other foods, and slowly, the green hue of their skin began to fade. The boy, unfortunately, grew ill and died soon after baptism. The girl survived. She gradually learned to speak English, and in time told a story that only deepened the mystery. She claimed that they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where the sun never shone. The light there was like twilight. Everyone was green like them. She said they had been tending their father's flocks when they heard a strange sound, like the ringing of a great bell. They followed it, and suddenly found themselves near the Woolpit in this new and terrifying world. But where was St. Martin's Land? Over the centuries, many theories have been proposed, some grounded in historical context, others drifting into the realms of folklore, fantasy, and the unexplained. One of the more rational interpretations suggests that the children were Flemish immigrants. During the 12th century, a number of Flemish settlers were living in the area, and many had recently been persecuted during the civil unrest under King Stephen. Could the children have been orphans, survivors of a nearby massacre? Perhaps they spoke a dialect no one in Woolpit recognized, and their unusual clothing marked them as foreigners. The green tint in their skin might have been caused by malnutrition, possibly a condition like chlorosis, sometimes called green sickness. But this explanation has its flaws. The children were found near Woolpit, deep inland. How would two young children, possibly traumatized and starving, have traveled alone without being seen? And what of the girl's detailed description of a sunless land, a place where everyone was green? Could this have been more than metaphor? In time, more speculative ideas began to take root. Some suggested that the children had emerged from an underground world, a hollow earth or hidden cavern society lit by perpetual twilight. This idea is echoed in myths from around the globe, including tales from ancient Greece, Tibet, and even indigenous American stories, where entire civilizations are said to dwell beneath the earth. Others proposed that the children were not human at all, but visitors from another realm. A popular modern theory casts the green children as extraterrestrials, accidental travelers through a dimensional rift or interstellar anomaly. Their strange language, otherworldly clothing, aversion to earthly food, and even their green skin have been cited as evidence of alien origin. According to this theory, their transition from St. Martin's Land to Woolpit might have been the result of a wormhole or a technological mishap, something beyond the comprehension of 12th century minds. Still others turn to folklore. In the British Isles, tales of the fair folk abound, mysterious beings living parallel to human society, sometimes venturing into our world through natural portals or thin places. Could the children have been changelings or lost fae caught between worlds? Some traditions speak of time moving differently in the fairy realms, of strange food and altered appearances. The fact that the girl eventually adapted, that her skin changed color and she took on a human name and marriage, could that be the fading of magic, the integration of something other into the human world? And yet, these are only interpretations. Today, Woolpit remains a quiet place. The pits themselves are gone, and the village has changed. But echoes of the story remain, on signs, in books, and in the minds of those drawn to what cannot be explained. Skeptics see a misremembered tale, distorted by time. Others see fragments of truth wrapped in legend. But the fact that two separate chroniclers recorded the event, not as myth, but as history, has kept the story alive for nearly 9 centuries. What did the girl mean when she spoke of a land where the sun never rose? Could it have been a place deep in the earth? Or a memory of another world entirely? And most haunting of all, was this an isolated incident, or just one moment, recorded by chance? In a larger pattern we've never truly understood. As the fields of Suffolk sway gently in the breeze, the mystery remains, half buried in time, impossible to prove, but harder still to dismiss. Who were the green children of Woolpit? And where did they truly come from? Fog rolls across the rugged hills of northern Britain. The moorland is bleak and windswept, the sky heavy with gray clouds that never seem to lift. A silence lingers here, broken only by the sound of wind through heather and the distant call of a raven. This is Hadrian's Wall country, a line of stone stretching from coast to coast, marking the furthest reach of the Roman Empire. And somewhere beyond these cold northern edges, in the mists of the 2nd century AD, a Roman legion disappeared. Not in battle records, not in heroic epics, not even in formal dispatches sent back to Rome. The 9th Legion Hispana simply vanished. For over a century, the 9th Legion had served the empire with distinction. Raised in the 1st century BC, likely under Pompey or Julius Caesar, it fought in the Gallic Wars, in Spain, in the brutal campaigns of Germania. Later, it helped suppress the Boudiccan revolt in Britain around 60 AD, a bloody conflict that nearly destroyed the Roman hold on the island. They were seasoned, experienced, loyal. And then, after roughly 120 AD, all mention of them in Britain ceases. There are no tombstones, no victory arches, no commemorative inscriptions. In a world where Roman bureaucracy carefully recorded legions' movements, ranks, and honors, this silence is deafening. What happened to the 9th? The traditional theory suggests that they were wiped out in northern Britain, ambushed by native tribes, perhaps the Caledonians or the Picts, during a campaign north of the Roman frontier. Tacitus, writing earlier, described how difficult and treacherous the land was, how the people fought like ghosts, melting into forests and marshes, striking without warning. It is possible that the 9th marched north and never returned. Supporters of this theory point to the construction of Hadrian's Wall around 122 AD. Was the wall, massive, fortified, and meticulously planned, built in direct response to a disaster? Was it Rome's attempt to hold back a growing threat that had already overwhelmed one of its best legions? But this explanation, while compelling, is not without problems. Archaeological evidence complicates the narrative. A tile stamp bearing the mark of the 9th Legion has been found in Nijmegen in the Netherlands, dating to a time after their presumed disappearance in Britain. Some historians argue this shows the legion was redeployed to the continent, not destroyed. Perhaps they left Britain quietly and met their fate elsewhere, maybe during the Bar Kokhba revolt in Palestine, or in battles along the Rhine frontier. Yet no record of such a transfer exists. And more curiously, no later Roman texts mention the 9th Legion at all, not even in lists of units reassigned or disbanded. Their name vanishes from the rolls. Is it possible they were destroyed, but the loss was covered up? Rome was no stranger to military disaster. The annihilation of 3 legions under Varus in the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD is a well-documented catastrophe. So why wouldn't Rome record the loss of the 9th? Some historians speculate it may have been politically inconvenient. Perhaps the loss undermined confidence in the emperor's British campaign. Or perhaps it wasn't a single battle, but a slow erosion of morale and numbers. Desertion, disease, and internal dissent. A legion that fell apart from within would be a source of shame, not glory. Then there are those who look to darker possibilities. Could the legion have turned against Rome? There are whispers, unsubstantiated but intriguing, that the Ninth may have rebelled, that in the far reaches of empire, isolated and exhausted, they broke away. No inscription survives to prove it, but oral legends in Scotland speak of a foreign army that entered the north and was never seen again. Could some have integrated into the local tribes? Could they have vanished into history not by dying, but by changing sides? Fiction and folklore have filled in the gaps left by history. The story of the missing legion has inspired countless books, films, and speculations. But behind the romanticism lies a gnawing uncertainty. The remains of the legion's fort at York, their last known posting, are silent. No mass graves, no relics of a final stand, just the stone outlines of barracks, temples, and training grounds, frozen in time. A few worn inscriptions still bear the legion's name. One reads simply, Leg 9, Hispana, and then nothing. Could their fate still lie buried beneath the soil of northern Britain? Could a forgotten battlefield, somewhere among the foggy hills and silent valleys, hold the key? Or are we looking in the wrong place entirely? In the face of so much uncertainty, even more speculative theories emerge. Some writers have suggested that the disappearance of the Ninth is linked to ancient prophecies or omens, signs that Rome's reach had extended too far. Others point to tales of vanishing armies found in Celtic legend, or link the mystery to ancient sites of power said to be cursed or sacred. While these ideas remain outside the realm of established history, they reflect a deeper truth, that the story of the Ninth Legion taps into something primal, a fear not of death, but of erasure, of being lost, not in battle, but in memory. What force, what circumstance could erase an entire legion so completely that its fate remains unknown 2,000 years later? And if it happened once, could it happen again? As the cold wind brushes against the stones of Hadrian's wall, the question lingers, unanswered and unresolved. What became of the Ninth Legion? And what secrets still lie hidden beneath the northern soil they marched into and never returned from? The Niger River flows like a ribbon of life through the vast golden plains of West Africa, carving its way through sunlit savannas and ancient cities. On its banks once stood the mighty empire of Mali, a land of scholars, warriors, and wealth beyond imagination. In the 14th century, its capital at Niani shimmered with gold, trade, and learning. But among the many legends that swirl through the annals of this empire, one story remains clouded in silence and shadow: the mysterious disappearance of Mansa Abu Bakari II, the emperor who gave up his crown and sailed into the Atlantic Ocean, never to return. What was he seeking, and what did he find? Mansa Abu Bakari II, also known in some chronicles as Mansa Muhammad, was a ruler of Mali before the more widely known Mansa Musa, the emperor whose pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 stunned the Islamic world with its unimaginable wealth. But it was Musa himself who told the world of his predecessor's obsession with the sea. During an interview in Cairo, Mansa Musa recounted that the throne had come to him not through inheritance or conquest, but because his predecessor had voluntarily abdicated. Abu Bakari, he said, had launched a fleet of ships, hundreds, perhaps thousands, into the Atlantic Ocean in search of what lay beyond the horizon. He appointed Musa as his regent, and then disappeared into history. No one knows what became of him. The official Malian account, preserved in medieval Arabic texts like Al-Masalik wal-Mamalik by Al-Umari, suggests that Abu Bakari believed the ocean was not an end, but a path, like the Niger, only greater, According to Musa, the first expedition he launched consisted of 200 ships. Only one returned. The captain reported sailing for months until encountering a powerful current in the open sea that dragged most of the fleet out of sight. He turned back, but Abu Bakari was not deterred. Instead, he assembled an even larger fleet, reportedly 2,000 ships, equipped with provisions, gold, and learned men. And this time, he went with them. Then, nothing. The idea of a medieval African emperor launching an Atlantic voyage in the early 1300s challenges many conventional narratives. Mainstream history often centers European exploration in the story of the Atlantic, beginning with the Portuguese in the 15th century and culminating with Columbus in 1492. But what if Abu Bakari reached the shores of the Americas almost 2 centuries earlier? Some researchers believe it's not only possible, but likely. Oral traditions in parts of West Africa preserve vague memories of a great voyage, of ships that never returned. Meanwhile, in the Americas, some pre-Columbian accounts, particularly among the Olmec and later the Aztec, describe mysterious visitors from the east, dark-skinned men who arrived by sea. In 1311, nearly the exact year Abu Bakari vanished, certain Mesoamerican cultures began incorporating new agricultural and maritime techniques, seemingly without local precedent. Coincidence? Or contact? In 1312, Mansa Musa became emperor. His rule was legendary, and his pilgrimage to Mecca put Mali on the world stage. But he never contradicted the story of Abu Bakari. He never claimed that the voyage failed, only that the fleet had vanished beyond the Atlantic horizon. There have been tantalizing clues. In parts of Central and South America, researchers have noted pre-Columbian art and sculpture that seem to depict West African features. In Brazil, stone inscriptions of uncertain origin contain writing that some claim resembles ancient Mande script. In Haiti and the Gulf of Mexico, there are faint archaeological traces that suggest transatlantic contact long before the arrival of Europeans. And then there is the mystery of the currents themselves. Modern oceanographers have observed that a ship leaving the West African coast near the Gambia or Senegal rivers would be naturally pulled westward by the Canary Current, passing into the North Equatorial Current, which flows directly toward the Caribbean and the northern coast of South America. With enough ships and knowledge of sailing, a fleet could indeed cross the ocean, intentionally or not. But there is, of course, no definitive proof. Skeptics point out that no solid archaeological evidence has yet been found to confirm contact between Mali and the Americas. No West African artifacts have been conclusively dated to the early 14th century in the New World. The oral traditions are inconsistent. The supposed similarities in artwork may be coincidental. They argue that Musa's account, while compelling, could have been a political narrative, a way to legitimize his own rule by telling a story of a voluntary handover rather than a contested succession. Still, the question lingers. Why would a powerful emperor, ruling one of the wealthiest states in the world, abandon his throne for the unknown? What drove him to the edge of the world? Curiosity? Faith? Desperation? Or something else entirely? Could it be that Abu Bakari was responding to older legends? Tales passed down from earlier African seafarers, Phoenician traders, or even Egyptian navigators who spoke of lands beyond the ocean. Could he have been chasing a dream etched deep into Mali's ancestral memory of a land not yet discovered, but long remembered? Or perhaps he simply believed that knowledge itself was worth any risk, that some truths could only be found by stepping beyond the known world. Today, the name of Abu Bakari II is largely forgotten, overshadowed by Mansa Musa's legendary wealth. His story exists in fragments scattered across Arabic manuscripts, Malian oral history, and speculative scholarship. No shipwreck has been found. No map bears his name. No record confirms his fate. And yet, the image endures. A fleet of dark-sailed ships drifting westward under a blazing African sun, disappearing into the Atlantic mist, carrying an emperor who may have reached a new world centuries before it was discovered. What became of Mansa Abu Bakari Thetan? And if his fleet did touch foreign shores, might its echoes still lie buried in the soil, waiting to be found? The Egyptian desert can be many things: brutal, windswept, blindingly silent. But above all, it is vast, standing on the edge of the great sand sea, with dunes rising like golden waves and the sky a sheet of endless blue. One is struck by the overwhelming stillness. And yet, buried somewhere within this arid expanse, according to ancient accounts, lies the lost army of Cambyses II, 50,000 Persian soldiers swallowed whole by the sands more than 2,500 years ago. No graves, no weapons, no trace, just a chilling silence where a great host once marched. What happened to this army? And why has no definitive evidence of its fate ever been found? The tale begins with Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great and ruler of the Achaemenid Persian Empire in the 6th century BC. After his successful conquest of Egypt around 525 BC, Cambyses set his sights on further expansion. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote nearly a century later, the Persian king dispatched an army of 50,000 men to destroy the oracle at the Siwa oasis, a remote and sacred site dedicated to the god Amun, located deep in Egypt's western desert. The reason? Herodotus claimed that the priests of Amun refused to recognize Cambyses as the rightful pharaoh of Egypt. Enraged, the king ordered a military expedition, not just to punish the priests, but to obliterate the oracle entirely. The army set off from Thebes, heading west across the desert, guided by local tribes. They marched for 7 days until they reached the oasis of Karga. From there, they turned toward Siwa. But according to Herodotus, they never arrived. Midway through their journey, somewhere in the shifting dunes, a fierce sandstorm, so violent and sudden that it defied imagination, swept across the desert and buried the entire force alive. An entire army, gone, without a trace. It's an extraordinary claim, and for centuries many scholars have debated its plausibility. Could a force that large truly vanish without a single piece of physical evidence left behind? Is Herodotus's account a factual record, or a myth shaped by time, hearsay, and dramatic embellishment? Modern historians remain divided. On one hand, the logistics of such a campaign were not impossible for the Persians. They were known for moving large forces across difficult terrain, and the route described by Herodotus, from Thebes through Karga and onward to Siwa, aligns with known desert pathways, still used by traders and nomads today. But others question whether the story has been exaggerated or misunderstood entirely. Some suggest the army may have been ambushed by hostile desert tribes. Others believe it could have simply gotten lost, suffering a slow, agonizing death from thirst and exposure rather than a sudden cataclysm. Still others wonder whether the expedition even existed at all. Yet the desert, indifferent and eternal, holds its secrets tightly. Over the years, various explorers and archaeologists have tried to locate the lost army. Some followed the old caravan routes through the Libyan desert, while others focused on the sands near Siwa itself. In 1933, Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasi, whose life partially inspired The English Patient, searched extensively for evidence. He found ancient pottery shards, camel bones, and traces of human activity, but nothing conclusive. Then, in 2009, 2 Italian researchers, twin brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, claimed they had discovered the army's final resting place. Using satellite imagery and on-the-ground surveys, They reported finding arrowheads, pieces of weapons, and human remains in an area about 100 kilometers southwest of Siwa. The media seized the story, but the archaeological community was cautious. The findings had not been peer-reviewed. The precise location was never disclosed. Some of the artifacts may have been from later periods. Without rigorous analysis, the claim, while tantalizing, remains unproven. Was it a breakthrough, or yet another mirage in the desert? There are other possibilities, ones that veer closer to the speculative. Could the army have stumbled upon something unexpected in the sands? An unknown settlement? A religious site too sacred to be violated? Could they have been defeated not by nature or war, but by fear, superstition, or even desert hallucination? Some fringe theorists propose more exotic ideas. That the soldiers entered a zone of the desert where magnetic or energetic anomalies disoriented them. That they encountered a phenomenon, natural or otherwise, so strange it led to panic and chaos. There are even whispers in some esoteric circles that the Siwa region hides something older than history itself, structures or secrets not meant to be found. But these are speculations, shadows cast by a lack of evidence. Still, they speak to the enduring fascination with this mystery. How does one reconcile an official account of 50,000 men vanishing without a single grave to mourn them? The Siwa Oasis still exists today, a small remote community surrounded by date palms, hot springs, and sand dunes. The Oracle of Amun is in ruins, but it remains a place of quiet reverence. Alexander the Great himself made a pilgrimage here, seeking divine confirmation of his rule. One wonders, did he walk among the ghosts of Cambyses' lost men, hearing whispers carried by the wind? To this day, no definitive trace of the army has been found. No mass grave, no campsite, no armory scattered across the dunes. Only wind-blown theories and the endless silence of the desert. Did Herodotus invent the story? Did the sands truly rise and erase an empire's pride in a single day? Or is the truth still buried, waiting for time or chance to unearth it? The great sand sea stretches on, unchanged. Somewhere beneath those dunes, perhaps, the bones of an army lie still, silent witnesses to a forgotten march and a fate that defied the written record. What secrets does the desert still keep? And how many voices are buried beneath its shifting skin, calling out from an empire's forgotten edge? Deep within the worn, yellowed pages of ancient manuscripts, scattered across monastic libraries and desert caves, lies a silence, an absence more profound than presence. It is not what is written that haunts historians and theologians, but what is missing. There is no scroll, no codex, no parchment fragment to hold in the hand. And yet, for over a century, scholars have searched for it. The elusive Gospel of Q. We begin not in a desert or a ruined temple, but in the quiet study rooms of 19th century Europe, where biblical scholars pored over the texts of the New Testament with critical eyes. What they found sparked one of the most enduring literary mysteries of the modern era. They noticed that large portions of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke were strikingly similar, sometimes word for word. These were not just shared stories of miracles or parables. They were passages of precise language, down to the syntax and phrasing. Yet these same passages were not found in the Gospel of Mark, the earliest of the 4 canonical Gospels. What did this mean? Had Matthew and Luke simply copied Mark and added their own material? Or were they drawing from another, now lost source, an earlier document, older than all but memory, that had shaped their narratives? This hypothetical text came to be known as Q, short for Quell, the German word for source. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Gospel of Thomas, no physical manuscript of Q has ever been unearthed. No scrap of papyrus, no direct quote in ancient letters. It is an invisible gospel, an inferred document whose existence is suggested only by careful comparison and scholarly logic. But how does one prove the existence of a book that has never been seen? Proponents of the Q theory believe that it was a collection of Jesus's sayings, a logia, or anthology of teachings, rather than a narrative of his life. They point to the so-called double tradition, a body of nearly identical sayings that appear in both Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark. These include iconic teachings like the Beatitudes, Blessed are the poor, and the Lord's Prayer. Could these shared passages have come from a now vanished text that predated all others? If so, Q would not only be the earliest gospel, it would offer a glimpse of Christianity before it became a religion about Jesus, when it was still a movement centered on his voice. But this theory raises as many questions as it answers. Was Q ever a single document, or merely an oral tradition passed from village to village, shaped by memory and repetition? Could it have existed in written form in Aramaic or Greek, now lost to the winds of time? And if it did exist, who wrote it? Was it compiled by one of Jesus's followers? A wandering scribe? A community devoted not to his miracles or his resurrection, but to his words? Some scholars suggest that the Q community may have been a group of early Jewish Christians who rejected the growing institutionalization of Christianity. Their focus, they argue, was on ethical teachings rather than divine claims. If true, Q might reflect a branch of the Jesus movement that was eventually overshadowed and silenced by later orthodoxy. Others go further, speculating that Q was deliberately excluded or destroyed, its teachings too radical, too pacifist, or too human-centered for the emerging church. Could the loss of Q have been more than an accident of time? Might it have been part of a theological edit, erasing ideas that didn't align with the growing narrative of Jesus as divine savior? These are not idle questions. They speak to how religions are shaped, not only by what is remembered, but by what is forgotten. Over the decades, efforts to reconstruct Q have taken many forms. Scholars such as John Kloppenborg and Burton Mack attempted to reverse engineer the text, drawing solely from passages common to Matthew and Luke. These reconstructions offer a stark and intriguing vision of early Christianity, stripped of nativity stories, miracles, or crucifixion accounts. Instead, they present a Jesus who is more sage than savior, offering wisdom, social critiques, and cryptic parables. But not all agree. Some scholars argue that Q never existed, that Matthew may have copied Luke, or vice versa, without the need for a separate source. Others point to the instability of oral tradition in ancient Palestine, where teachings were preserved not by writing, but by spoken repetition. In such a context, overlaps might not require a lost document at all. Still, the Q hypothesis refuses to fade. The idea lingers, like the shadow of a voice on the wind. A gospel that shaped the foundations of Christian thought, now reduced to echoes between two other texts. Outside mainstream academia, more speculative theories flourish. Could Q be hidden in a monastery library, misfiled under another name? Could it be part of the Nag Hammadi cache, still waiting to be recognized for what it is? Might Q not be a gospel at all, but something more mysterious? A metaphysical teaching, a collection of coded aphorisms, even a philosophical text that spoke to truths uncomfortable for both the early church and Roman power? And then there's the question of language. If Q existed, was it written in Greek, the language of empire? Or was it first inscribed in Aramaic, the tongue of peasants, rebels, and prophets? If the latter, could we even recognize it now? The sands of the Middle East, especially in areas once part of Roman-occupied Palestine, have yielded many secrets in the last century. But the Gospel of Q, if it ever existed, has eluded all such discoveries. Today, the mystery remains. Q is neither confirmed nor disproven. It is an idea suspended between inference and faith, a silent manuscript whose presence is felt only in the spaces between other texts. In the halls of academia, it continues to spark debate. In theological circles, it raises questions about what early followers of Jesus truly believed. And for seekers of lost knowledge, it represents something more elusive, a voice from the past that may have once spoken, clearly and boldly, but was never meant to be preserved. Is the Gospel of Q merely a scholarly illusion? Or does it lie waiting, buried in sand, hidden in stone, or folded between forgotten pages? And if it were ever found, would we even recognize what we were seeing? Beneath the blazing Mediterranean sun, the crumbling stones of ancient Ionia whisper forgotten stories. Dry grasses sway gently along the windswept hillsides near Smyrna, modern-day Izmir, where, according to tradition, a blind poet once wandered. Somewhere along this coast, it is said, a man named Homer gave voice to the wrath of Achilles, the fall of Troy, and the gods who toyed with mortals like pieces on a divine chessboard. Yet, like a mirage shimmering above the Aegean, the figure of Homer remains elusive. For generations, students and scholars alike have opened their copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the most influential works in Western literature, and imagined a single, inspired bard at their source. A poet gifted with memory so prodigious he could recite thousands of lines without flaw. A cultural genius, shaping myth, history, and language into an epic tapestry of heroism and grief. But behind this familiar image lies a profound and unresolved question. Who really wrote the Iliad? The traditional view, stretching back to classical antiquity, places authorship in the hands of Homer, perhaps blind, perhaps itinerant, perhaps born around the 8th century BC. Ancient sources such as Herodotus and Pausanias mention him in passing. Some cities even claimed him as their own, erecting statues in his honor. But curiously, we know nothing definite about him. There is no agreed birthplace, no direct historical record, no manuscript bearing his signature, and this absence of evidence has only deepened the enigma. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the so-called Homeric question took hold among European intellectuals. Was Homer a single individual, or a symbolic name attached to a body of oral tradition? Could the Iliad and Odyssey have emerged from the collective voice of generations of bards, shaped and reshaped across time? Modern scholarship points to the rich oral traditions of ancient Greece as a possible explanation. In this view, the epics were not written in one sitting by one man, but evolved over centuries, rehearsed, remembered, performed, and eventually written down when writing became more widespread. If so, was Homer a compiler, an editor, a figurehead for an anonymous tradition? Or was there never a Homer at all? Linguistic studies provide subtle clues. The language of the Iliad is a hybrid, what scholars call Homeric Greek, a blend of different dialects and time periods. This suggests a long process of accretion, where newer forms and phrases mixed with older ones, hinting at a composite text. There are also inconsistencies within the poem. Different passages seem to reflect different cultural values, different understandings of divinity, even different technologies of warfare. Some moments portray Bronze Age combat, others suggest later Iron Age practices. And then there is the structure, remarkably intricate for an oral tradition. Could a single poet truly have conceived such a work entirely from memory? As we peel back layers of history, more radical theories emerge, none proven, but all tantalizing. Some suggest that the Iliad was written not by a man, but by a woman, perhaps a high-born priestess in a Mycenaean court, steeped in ritual and song. Could the tenderness and psychological depth of characters like Hector, Andromache, or even Helen reflect a voice different from the martial ethos traditionally attributed to Homer? Others point toward Near Eastern influences, echoes of Babylonian and Hittite legends woven into Greek fabric. In this view, the Iliad may not be purely Greek at all, but a syncretic poem built upon centuries of cultural exchange around the Eastern Mediterranean. There are even scholars who entertain the idea of lost manuscripts, pre-Homeric versions of the Trojan War story, perhaps written in Linear B or some forgotten dialect, waiting in buried archives or sunken libraries. But the mystery deepens still. No known original manuscript of the Iliad survives from before the 10th century AD. All existing versions are copies of copies, each subject to the quirks, errors, and interpretations of medieval scribes. If the poem ever had a definitive version, it is long gone. This raises uncomfortable questions. How much of the Iliad as we know it is authentic? How much was added later, intentionally or not? Was Homer, if he existed, the author, or merely a name imposed by later scholars trying to give order to a sprawling and ancient body of myth? And why does the mystery of Homer matter so deeply? Perhaps because the Iliad is more than a poem. It is a window into the soul of an ancient world. Through its verses, we glimpse a civilization struggling with honor, fate, love, rage, and mortality. Whoever crafted these words gave voice to the eternal human drama. To imagine that we may never know who that was, that the true author may be lost forever, is both haunting and strangely beautiful. Even today, in dusty university libraries and sun-drenched ruins, researchers continue to ask, who was Homer? A real man, blinded by time and legend? A cultural construction? A name without a face? Could the true author have deliberately chosen anonymity, allowing the story, rather than the storyteller, to endure? Or might the answer lie in some forgotten corner of history, inscribed in crumbling parchment, still waiting to be found? What truths might still rest, hidden, in the silence behind the lines of the greatest epic ever told? Deep beneath the baked sands of the Valley of the Kings, where ancient tombs twist through limestone like silent veins of memory, a stillness pervades. In the hush of these subterranean chambers, where the only light flickers from a torch's flame, walls speak in paint and chisel strokes. Cartouches, falcons, and forgotten gods watch over the dead. But among these resting places, one question continues to echo through the silence. Where is Nefertiti? Her name conjures elegance and power, immortalized in the famous limestone bust housed in Berlin, with her long neck, regal brow, and perfectly symmetrical features. For centuries, she has stood as the very face of ancient Egypt's golden age. And yet, the location of her remains, her true final resting place, remains one of Egyptology's most tantalizing mysteries. Nefertiti rose to prominence as the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, a controversial ruler who abandoned the pantheon of traditional gods in favor of a singular solar deity, the Aten. Together, they ruled from the strange and short-lived city of Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, ushering in a radical religious and artistic revolution. She wasn't merely a consort. In art and inscription, she appears as a co-regent, even smiting enemies and wearing the royal crown. At one point, some scholars believe she may have ruled independently under the name Nefer-Nefer-Watan, perhaps even filling the power vacuum between Akhenaten and the boy king Tutankhamun. Yet after about year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, she vanishes from the historical record. Was she deposed? Did she die suddenly of illness? Or did she ascend the throne in disguise, her identity obscured by later rulers attempting to erase the heretical memory of the Amarna period? The absence of a confirmed burial site for Nefertiti has turned her into a ghost, hovering just beyond the reach of certainty. Mainstream archaeological consensus long held that Nefertiti's tomb, if it ever existed, was likely destroyed or lost in the chaos following the collapse of Akhenaten's reign. The return to traditional religion under Tutankhamun led to the systematic dismantling of Amarna's legacy. Temples were razed, names were chiseled out, records were buried beneath layers of sanctioned forgetting. But then, in 2015, a ripple of excitement spread across the archaeological world. British Egyptologist Dr. Nicholas Reeves announced a bold hypothesis. Using high-resolution scans of Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered intact in 1922 by Howard Carter, Reeves identified faint traces of what he believed were sealed doorways behind the tomb's northern and western walls. These chambers, he speculated, could conceal an extension of the tomb, and possibly the undisturbed burial of Nefertiti herself. If true, this would be the most significant archaeological discovery in Egypt in a century. But despite media coverage and global anticipation, the theory remains unconfirmed. Ground-penetrating radar surveys yielded inconclusive results. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities halted further invasive exploration, citing a lack of definitive evidence. The walls remain unopened. Was Reeves seeing patterns where none exist? Or is Nefertiti lying just a few feet beyond the painted wall of her presumed stepson's tomb, untouched since the days of the New Kingdom? Meanwhile, another clue rests in a different part of the valley, in tomb KV35, the burial chamber of Amenhotep II. Here, in 1898, archaeologist Victor Loret found a cache of mummies hastily reburied in antiquity to protect them from tomb robbers. Among them was the mysterious Younger Lady, a damaged but well-preserved female mummy. For decades, her identity was unknown. Then, in 2010, DNA analysis linked her genetically to Tutankhamun. She was his biological mother. But curiously, she was not Nefertiti, at least not according to the current genealogical model, which places Nefertiti as Tutankhamun's stepmother, not his mother. So who is this woman? Could earlier assumptions be wrong? Was Nefertiti perhaps both mother and queen, more central to the royal bloodline than previously thought? Or does the Younger Lady belong to another of Akhenaten's wives, such as Kia, whose own life is shrouded in equal mystery? And then there's the body labeled the Elder Lady, thought by some to be Queen Tiye, Akhenaten's mother. The shifting identities and contested labels of these mummies reveal how fragile our historical reconstructions truly are. Even with modern science, the past does not easily yield its secrets. More speculative theories propose that Nefertiti's tomb lies not in the Valley of the Kings at all, but near Amarna, the very city she helped found. There, a site known as Tomb 26, uninscribed and incomplete, has been floated as a possible burial intended for a royal woman. Others believe her remains may have been moved in secret during the turmoil of the late 18th dynasty, hidden away to preserve her legacy from enemies. And there are still those who cling to the idea that the famous bust of Nefertiti itself, discovered in 1912 by Ludwig Borchardt, may contain hidden knowledge. Could inscriptions, maps, or symbols have been lost or obscured during the early days of its excavation? Or was the bust part of a tomb ensemble, the rest of which has never been found? The lines between fact and theory blur in the desert's heat. The search for Nefertiti's remains continues, not just because of who she was, but because of what she represents. To find her tomb, to confirm her identity, would be to illuminate one of the most radical chapters in Egyptian history. A woman who may have ruled as king, who defied the norms of religion and power, who vanished from history only to become its most enduring enigma. Why does her body remain hidden, while lesser royals have been unearthed and catalogued? Was it by design? Was her tomb deliberately concealed by her followers or by her enemies? Or is it simply waiting, silent beneath the sands, to be uncovered at last. And if it is ever found, will we finally see her face not in stone but in truth? Or will the mystery only deepen as Egypt whispers its secrets once more into the still desert air? The town of Hamelin rests quietly along the Weser River in northern Germany, nestled among gentle hills and cobblestone streets. Today, it is peaceful, storybook-like. Its timber-framed houses lean over narrow alleyways where the sound of footsteps echoes softly. A gilded clock tower marks the passage of time in the town square, just as it did centuries ago. But beneath this charm lies a shadow, a chilling story carved not only into local legend, but also, curiously, into the very bones of the town's history. A small plaque, set into stone on a quiet side street, reads simply, "In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, 130 children born in Hamelin were led away by a piper clothed in many colors to Calvary near the Koppen, and lost." No explanation, no return, just a date, and the disappearance of a generation. The story is best known through folklore, the tale of the Pied Piper, a figure with a haunting melody who first rid the town of a plague of rats, only to return for vengeance when the townspeople refused to pay him. With his magical pipe, he led the children away, never to be seen again. It is a fable passed down for centuries, an allegory perhaps about broken promises, greed, or the cost of dishonesty. The Brothers Grimm helped enshrine it in their 19th century collection, adding moral depth and narrative shape. But the deeper one looks, the more unsettling the tale becomes. Unlike other fairy tales, the story of Hamelin is rooted in something disturbingly real. Multiple historical records from the Middle Ages, some as early as the 14th century, refer to the event in eerily sober language. They don't mention rats. They don't describe magic. They speak only of a loss, a mass disappearance. The town's oldest surviving manuscript from around 1384 begins simply, "It is 100 years since our children left." A stained glass window in the town's church, long since destroyed but recorded in historical writings, once depicted the brightly dressed piper leading children away. Local records, chroniclers, and even civic documents treat the event not as myth, but as a fact of Hamelin's past. What, then, could have truly happened on that summer day in 1284? One explanation suggests a tragic accident, a landslide, or perhaps a sudden sinkhole near the nearby hills, swallowing the children as they followed a figure in a procession. The town lies close to several cave systems and unstable geological zones. But if such a tragedy occurred, why the silence in the surrounding records? Why would so many children be marching outside the town walls unsupervised? Others posit disease or plague, with the figure of the piper representing death itself, his colorful clothing echoing the mottled skin of the infected. Yet again, contemporary accounts of plagues were far more explicit and fear-driven. The Hamelin story remains strangely restrained, almost ritualistic. Some historians believe the piper represents a recruiter, possibly a land agent from Eastern Europe. During the 13th century, regions like Transylvania, Prussia, and Pomerania were encouraging German settlement to populate remote areas. Colonization efforts were common, and settlers were often recruited en masse by agents offering land and freedom. Could it be that the children, likely adolescents, young enough to be called children but old enough to work, were taken away to repopulate distant territories? Was the piper simply a symbol of migration? A leader in bright foreign clothes guiding them eastward? And yet, even if this is so, why would Hamelin commemorate it as a tragedy? Why does the tone of every record evoke mourning, not pride? More esoteric theories add layers of complexity. Some have wondered whether the children were part of a heretical religious movement, drawn away by charismatic preachers promising salvation or a utopian community. The Children's Crusade of 1212, though poorly documented, is one precedent. In that earlier case, thousands of young people across Europe set off for the Holy Land, led by supposed visions and divine callings. Few returned. Could the event in Hamelin have been a smaller, localized version? A mass exodus of spiritual idealism gone wrong? Even darker suggestions hint at ritual sacrifice, forced conscription, or exploitation. The complete disappearance of so many individuals, with no bodies, no graves, and no returning witnesses, leaves open unsettling possibilities. Local traditions in Hamelin say the children may have followed the piper into a mountain, a cave, or even into the very earth, swallowed in silence. The hill where this supposedly happened is still known today as Poppenberg or Koppen, and to this day, according to long-held custom, no music is played there. Linguists have traced the spread of surnames and dialects eastward that bear striking resemblance to those in Hamelin. In parts of Poland and Romania, clusters of families share traits in speech and name that hint at a Western German origin. Is this the faint afterimage of the vanished children, echoes across the continent? But with no definitive records, no artifacts, and no consistent testimony, all we are left with is legend, conjecture, and a deeply uncomfortable silence. And perhaps that's the most chilling aspect of all. Why would a town mark the disappearance of its children in stone, in glass, and in memory, yet leave behind no full account of what truly occurred? What did they lose? And what were they trying to forget? Were the children victims of tragedy, or pioneers unknowingly immortalized in sorrow? Did they vanish into death, into slavery, into distant lands, or into myth? As Hamelin's streets grow quiet once more, and the piper's melody fades with the passing centuries, we are left only with the question, what truly happened to the lost children of Hamelin? The storm-lashed coast of western France bears many scars from centuries of war, betrayal, and secrecy. Among its ruins, tucked behind the ancient walls of La Rochelle, a medieval port fortified with weathered stone towers and hidden tunnels, one story lingers more stubbornly than others. It is a story whispered by the wind that sweeps in from the Atlantic, a story etched into the memory of knights, kings, and the silent sea itself. La Rochelle was once a stronghold of the Knights Templar, an order of warrior monks founded in the early 12th century, sworn to protect Christian pilgrims on their journey to the Holy Land. But by the 13th century, the Templars had become more than guardians. They were bankers, landowners, diplomats, and according to some, keepers of a treasure so vast and mysterious that its very existence continues to provoke debate, fascination, and fear. What happened to the Templar treasure? This question has echoed through the centuries, following the violent and abrupt downfall of one of the most powerful and secretive orders in medieval Europe. On October 13th, 1307, Friday the 13th, a date now forever associated with misfortune, King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of the Templar leadership. Accusations ranged from heresy and idol worship to financial corruption. Torture was used to extract confessions. The once mighty order was dissolved by papal decree in 1312. Its Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in 1314. But when French authorities stormed the Templar commanderies, they found very little. Despite rumors of unimaginable wealth, gold, silver, sacred relics, and perhaps even documents tied to the very origins of Christianity, the treasure vaults were empty. How could the riches of an organization that once rivaled kingdoms in power simply vanish overnight? Mainstream historians point to plausible answers. Some suggest that the idea of the Templar treasure has been inflated over time, that the order, while certainly wealthy, likely reinvested much of its assets in land, military infrastructure, and loans. When the arrests came, The treasure may have already been dispersed among various holdings or seized quietly by rival factions. But the gaps in the record are striking. La Rochelle, the Templars' primary naval base in France, played a pivotal role. It is here that many speculative accounts begin. Eyewitnesses at the time allegedly reported the sight of Templar ships, fully laden, sailing from the harbor days or even hours before the arrests. These vessels, flying the Templar flag, vanished into the Atlantic, never to be seen again. Where were they headed? Some believe the ships went north, toward Scotland, a country at odds with the papacy and thus a potential refuge. According to legend, surviving Templars integrated with local nobility and possibly even influenced the formation of later secret societies. In Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh, carved symbols and architectural oddities have fueled theories of hidden vaults and concealed artifacts. Others speculate the treasure crossed the ocean to distant lands. North America is often invoked, particularly the rugged shores of Nova Scotia, where the infamous Oak Island mystery has gripped treasure hunters for over 2 centuries. Some point to supposed Masonic symbols carved into stone, or old maps that hint at Templar presence long before the time of Columbus. Could the Templars have sailed west, taking their treasure and their secrets with them? And what exactly was this treasure? Here the mystery deepens further. Was it mere gold and silver? Or did it include something more intangible, more dangerous? Some believe the Templars possessed documents rescued from the ruins of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, ancient scrolls, lost gospels, or genealogical records that challenged the foundations of church authority. If such relics existed, their destruction, or concealment, would have been imperative for those in power. The Holy Grail, too, is often linked to Templar lore. Not necessarily as a literal cup, but as a metaphor for hidden truth, sacred lineage, or forbidden knowledge. Was this the real treasure they guarded so fiercely? Others speak of the Ark of the Covenant, a relic of biblical legend said to contain the 10 Commandments. Could it have fallen into the hands of the Templars during their time in Palestine and been spirited away before their downfall? These ideas, fringe though they may be, persist because no one can say definitively what was lost, only that something was. The Vatican's role adds another layer. Pope Clement V, under pressure from King Philip, allowed the order's dissolution but never produced convincing evidence of heresy. Was he complicit in covering up a deeper truth, or simply swept along by the tides of power? Some claim that a small inner circle within the Templars, perhaps unknown even to most members, was entrusted with safeguarding the true treasure. Their oaths were unbreakable, their knowledge never written, and their mission still ongoing. Today, La Rochelle is quiet. Its port bustles with fishermen, tourists, and students. The tunnels beneath the Templar compound have been sealed or forgotten. Yet in the dark spaces between stone and silence, the questions remain. If the treasure was moved, where did it go? If it was hidden, what was so important that it had to remain secret for 700 years? And if the Templars left clues, scattered across lands and symbols, in architecture, in maps, in myth, have we failed to recognize them? Or are we simply not meant to understand? The sea outside La Rochelle continues to lap gently against the harbor walls, as it did that fateful morning in 1307. Somewhere out there, perhaps beyond the reach of history, lie the answers. Buried, lost, or deliberately concealed. And so we are left to wonder, what treasure did the Templars really guard? And who guards it now? Under the relentless sun of southern Iraq, near the banks of the Euphrates River, the dust of millennia clings to a landscape shaped by empires, gods, and kings. The air here is thick with silence, broken only by the occasional gust of desert wind or the distant cry of a raven overhead. Amid the eroded walls of what was once Uruk, one of the world's oldest known cities, stone foundations hint at a forgotten grandeur. Here, buried deep beneath the sands, lies a mystery that has haunted historians and archaeologists for over a century. Who was Gilgamesh? His name first emerged in fragmented cuneiform tablets pulled from ancient Mesopotamian ruins, clay inscribed with wedge-shaped marks that speak of heroes, monsters, and divine encounters. The Epic of Gilgamesh, as it came to be called, is the oldest known literary work in human history, dating back to at least 2100 BC. A tale of a king's struggle with mortality, friendship, and the gods. But also perhaps a cryptic biography of a real man, elevated through myth and time into something more. The epic itself offers a compelling portrait. Gilgamesh is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, born of a mortal king and a goddess. He is a tyrant transformed by grief, who undertakes a harrowing quest to escape death after losing his closest companion, Enkidu. Along the way, he slays monsters, meets ancient survivors of a great flood, and ultimately returns home, wiser, but mortal still. For centuries, Gilgamesh was dismissed as fiction, just another ancient myth, no more real than Hercules or King Arthur. But then came a discovery that changed everything. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists excavating Nineveh in the ruins of King Ashurbanipal's royal library uncovered a set of clay tablets, now famously known as the standard Babylonian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The narrative they revealed was startling not only in literary depth, but in its underlying realism. Cities, rivers, temples, and rulers mentioned in the text matched known archaeological sites and records. Could this mythical king have been based on a historical figure? The city of Uruk, long thought legendary, was eventually found to be very real. Founded over 5,000 years ago, it was one of the first major urban centers in human history. Its walls, described in the epic as mighty and unbreachable, are now believed to have once stretched nearly 6 miles in circumference, a marvel of early engineering. Sumerian king lists carved into stone tablets list Gilgamesh as the 5th king of Uruk, ruling sometime around 2800 to 2500 BC. His reign was said to last 126 years, a fantastical duration by modern standards, but not unusual for ancient records that sought to elevate kings closer to the divine. Still, these lists, while suggestive, do not confirm his identity. They raise as many questions as they answer. Was Gilgamesh a real king whose deeds were later mythologized? Or a completely fictional construct meant to represent the ideal or flawed ruler? Archaeological investigations have attempted to trace his historical footprint. In the 2000s, a German team led by archaeologist Jörg Fassbinder used ground-penetrating radar to survey areas near ancient Uruk. What they discovered was tantalizing. The outlines of a long-buried structure they described as a potential palatial complex along an old branch of the Euphrates. Some hypothesized it could be the tomb of Gilgamesh himself. The media buzzed with headlines. Has Gilgamesh's tomb been found? But official confirmation never came. The site was quickly closed, and further excavation was halted amid political instability. No relics were released to the public. No scholarly papers followed. The sands of Uruk closed once again over their secret. Why was the dig abandoned so suddenly? What might lie beneath that ancient earth, still hidden from our eyes? Speculation thrives in the absence of facts. Some fringe theories suggest that Gilgamesh may have been more than human, echoing the epic's claim of divine ancestry. His feats of strength, his encounters with gods and monsters, might these be distorted memories of real events or symbolic accounts of lost technologies or forgotten knowledge? Others point to the flood narrative in the epic, which predates the biblical account by centuries. Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, a man granted eternal life after surviving a cataclysmic deluge. The parallels are uncanny. Could this mean that Gilgamesh's tale preserves oral history reaching back to actual geological events? Massive floods, migrations, or societal upheavals now obscured by myth? A more esoteric theory suggests that Gilgamesh represents a hybrid, part divine, part human, not in a literal sense, but as a symbol of the blurred line between myth and memory, between reality and storytelling. Some researchers speculate he may have been a powerful ruler whose legacy was absorbed into Sumerian religious cosmology. Others wonder whether Gilgamesh is a composite figure, built from the lives of multiple early kings, each adding a layer to the legend. Yet perhaps the most compelling mystery is not whether Gilgamesh lived, but why his story endures. Thousands of years after the fall of Uruk, his name still resonates. His struggles feel achingly modern. The fear of death, the pain of loss, the search for meaning. And still, the question lingers in academic circles and among curious minds alike. Is Gilgamesh buried beneath the ruins of Uruk? Does some remnant of his reign, an inscription, a tomb, an artifact, still lie undiscovered beneath the Mesopotamian earth? Or was he never meant to be found, destined to remain a figure shrouded in both dust and divinity? As the sun sets over the Euphrates, casting long shadows across the broken walls of Uruk, the question of Gilgamesh's true identity remains unanswered. Was he a man, a myth, or something in between? And if we ever uncover his resting place, will it change the way we see history, or ourselves? The landscape stretches endlessly in all directions, a harsh, silent expanse where the ochre sands of the outback meet a pale, searing sky. Spinifex grass rustles in the wind, and twisted ghost gums rise like silent sentinels from the red earth. The air smells of dust and eucalyptus, dry and ancient. Somewhere beyond this vast horizon, swallowed by the silence of a continent, an expedition vanished, leaving behind no witnesses, no journals, no final footprints in the sand. This is the story of Ludwig Leichhardt, a man of science, a dreamer, and the central figure in one of the most enduring mysteries in Australian history. Born in Prussia in 1813, Friedrich Wilhelm Ludwig Leichhardt was a naturalist and explorer drawn to the unknown. When he arrived in Australia in the early 1840s, the interior of the continent was still a mystery to Europeans. The coasts had been mapped, settlements had been established, but the vast heart of the land remained uncharted and foreboding. Leichhardt's ambition was monumental. He wanted not only to explore, but to cross the entire continent from east to west, through some of the harshest and most remote terrain on Earth. His early expeditions were grueling, yet successful. In 1844, he completed a 3,000-mile journey from Brisbane to Port Essington in the north, an extraordinary feat that earned him praise, medals, and a reputation as one of the great explorers of his time. But it was his final journey that would secure his place in history, not for what he achieved, but for what was never found. In early 1848, Leichhardt set out from the Darling Downs in Queensland, leading a small expedition of 7 men, with dozens of animals and 2 years' worth of supplies. Their goal? To reach the Swan River settlement in what is now Perth. It was a journey of over 2,000 miles across uncharted wilderness. And then, silence. No messages, no sightings, no survivors. Months passed, then years. Search parties were dispatched, letters were published in newspapers, and Aboriginal accounts were gathered from remote regions. Some reported white men seen traveling with camels. Others spoke of violence, of disease, of starvation. But nothing conclusive was ever found. The expedition had vanished without a trace. How could an entire party disappear so completely? Several hypotheses have emerged over time. The most immediate theory, and perhaps the most tragic, is that the expedition succumbed to the immense environmental challenges of the outback. Harsh droughts, unreliable water holes, and searing heat could have overwhelmed even a well-prepared group. Supplies might have run low. Illness or internal conflict could have set in. But even in such a scenario, where are the remains? The equipment? The journals? The outback is vast, but it does not erase everything. Intriguingly, bits and pieces have surfaced over the years, fragments like shadows reaching out from the past. In the 1860s, explorer Duncan McIntyre reported seeing trees marked with the letter L and a possible blazed trail far to the north of Leichhardt's intended route. Aboriginal guides claimed they had seen men with animals long ago, who later died in the region. In 1900, an Aboriginal group handed over a brass nameplate found near the Barcoo River, inscribed with Leichhardt's name. The plate had been nailed to a firearm, a deeply personal and telling artifact. Later, in 2006, a small brass fragment marked with Leichhardt's initials was analyzed and confirmed to date from the right period. It had been found in the Northern Territory, far from his original projected path. Could this suggest that Leichhardt abandoned his original course and turned north in a desperate bid for survival? Or was he following a previously unknown route, perhaps aiming for the Gulf of Carpentaria? Then there are the more speculative theories, ideas that push the boundaries of historical consensus, but which continue to intrigue. One such theory suggests Leichhardt may have been killed early in the journey, perhaps in a conflict, with his remaining party splitting up or integrating into Aboriginal communities. Some Aboriginal oral traditions tell of white men being adopted or taken in, only to eventually perish or disappear. Could Leichhardt or one of his men have survived, living out the remainder of his life far from European eyes? Another proposes that the group may have made it much further west than anyone suspected, and perhaps reached the very edge of their goal, before succumbing to exhaustion, disease, or violence. If this were true, they would have been tantalizingly close to rewriting the map of Australia. But again, without remains, it is only speculation. Still others wonder whether the desert swallowed up not just the men, but something they carried: records, drawings, observations, or evidence that could challenge accepted history. Some fringe thinkers even go so far as to suggest Leichhardt encountered something unexplainable in the heart of the continent, an ancient site, a lost civilization, or a geographic anomaly, and that his disappearance was no accident, but part of a broader erasure. Of course, no evidence supports such claims. But in the vacuum of certainty, these ideas persist, kept alive by the enduring silence of the Australian interior. Today, monuments to Leichhardt stand in towns and parks, his name etched in stone, his face captured in weathered portraits. But his final footsteps remain untraced. No map records his last route. No grave marks his resting place. Why did such an experienced explorer, with prior success under his belt, vanish so thoroughly? Were there early signs of failure? Or did he press deeper into the land than anyone imagined, taking his story with him into the Red Earth? And if one day a weathered diary or rusted compass should surface, what would it tell us? Not just about his fate, but about the vast, unrecorded mysteries of a continent so often underestimated. As the sun sinks behind the rocky ranges, casting long, surreal shadows across the outback, the legacy of Ludwig Leichhardt hangs in the air, unseen, unburied, and unfinished. What lies out there, still waiting to be uncovered? And who will be the one to finally break the silence of the desert? The Calabrian hills of southern Italy are silent beneath the weight of centuries. Rolling olive groves blanket the rugged landscape, interrupted only by the distant glint of the Busento River as it winds through the valley like a silver serpent. At twilight, the sky hangs heavy with a dusky glow, and the stillness feels almost ceremonial, as if something long buried still watches from beneath the earth. Here, in the heart of ancient Brutium, one of the most legendary hoards in history is said to rest. Not in a vault or a tombstone-marked crypt, but beneath the very bed of the river itself, hidden in plain sight for over 600 years. This is the tale of Alaric's treasure, and the mystery of its vanishing. In the early 5th century AD, the Roman Empire, once a vast and seemingly indomitable force, was fracturing. Its western borders had weakened, and foreign tribes, once held at bay, now surged into its heartlands. Among these invaders stood one name that would etch itself into legend: Alaric I, King of the Visigoths. A shrewd military commander and a master of psychological warfare, Alaric harbored a bitter grudge against Rome. He had once served it, had seen promises broken, and now led his people not merely in revolt, but in vengeance. In 410 AD, Alaric and his forces achieved what few thought possible. They sacked Rome. It was the first time in 800 years that the city had fallen to a foreign enemy. The pillaging of Rome was swift, brutal, and methodical. Temples were stripped of gold. Statues were melted down. Priceless treasures, some believed to have originated in ancient Egypt, Greece, or even the far reaches of Persia, were taken in carts and wagons as plunder. Among the stolen relics were said to be sacred Jewish artifacts looted from the Temple of Jerusalem centuries earlier, seized by Titus in 70 AD and held in Rome's Temple of Peace. Golden menorahs, silver trumpets, and sacred vessels were all believed to have fallen into Alaric's hands. But if the treasures of Rome were truly captured, then where did they go? Alaric didn't live long after his victory. That same year, while still in southern Italy, perhaps en route to Sicily or North Africa, he died suddenly near the city of Cosenza. He was around 40 years old. The cause of death remains unclear. Malaria, a stroke, poisoning. Historians disagree. But what followed is the stuff of legend. According to early accounts, Alaric's followers diverted the course of the Busento River, dug a grave in its dry bed, buried their king along with his entire treasure, and then allowed the river to flow once more, concealing all evidence of the burial beneath the water's return. To ensure secrecy, the laborers who performed the task, reportedly slaves, were executed immediately after completing it. It's a tale that reads more like myth than history. And yet, it persists. Could such a feat really have been accomplished? Could an entire river have been manipulated with the tools of late antiquity? And if so, has Alaric and the immeasurable wealth of the Visigoths remained hidden in the riverbed all this time? The story captured imaginations almost immediately. In the 6th century, the Gothic historian Jordanes wrote of Alaric's burial under the Busento. Over the centuries, poets, chroniclers, and treasure seekers alike took up the tale. In the 19th century, German poet August von Platen immortalized it in verse, giving rise to romantic legends and renewed interest in the story. But despite centuries of searching, no physical trace has ever been found. The Busento flows on, its waters opaque, its banks undisturbed. Yet tantalizing clues have emerged, enough to keep curiosity alive. In the 20th century, small-scale excavations along the riverbank revealed fragments of Roman and Gothic artifacts, but nothing that could be definitively linked to Alaric. In recent years, with advancements in ground-penetrating radar and hydrological mapping, researchers have proposed various locations where a man-made diversion might have occurred. Still, no grave, no trove, no definitive discovery. Some historians have offered more grounded interpretations. Perhaps Alaric was buried with some ceremonial items, but not the full treasure. Perhaps his army carried the loot further south, intending to cross into Africa, a journey cut short by his death. Or perhaps, amid the chaos of empire collapse, The treasure was looted again, dispersed, melted down, or hidden elsewhere entirely. Others wonder if the entire story of the river burial was a purposeful deception, intended to draw attention away from the real location of the treasure, which may have been buried in the surrounding hills or concealed in a Visigothic stronghold farther inland. And then there are more speculative ideas. Could the treasure have reached Palestine, taken by the Visigoths, or later traded or ransomed to another power? Some have suggested connections with long-lost caches in North Africa, or with the eventual Visigothic kingdom in what is now Spain. Might clues to the treasure's fate lie not in Italy at all, but in Iberian monasteries, Moorish chronicles, or even secret Templar archives? There's also the lingering question of the sacred Jewish artifacts. Were they part of the treasure Alaric looted, or had they already been hidden elsewhere, long before the sack of Rome? If those sacred relics were among Alaric's plunder, then their loss is not merely historical, it is spiritual. Their whereabouts remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. Today, the city of Cosenza stands watch over the Bucento, its streets modern, but its stones ancient. Visitors stroll along the riverbanks, unaware of what legends may lie beneath their feet. And yet, beneath that calm surface, the past remains untouched, silent, enigmatic, and perhaps waiting. What truly became of Alaric's treasure? Is it a romantic myth, passed down through centuries of storytelling? Or is it a very real prize, still resting beneath the silt and stone of a forgotten riverbed, untouched since the fall of Rome? And if it were found, what truths, what secrets, what hidden histories might it finally reveal? The wind whips across the Karakum Desert, scattering fine grains of ochre sand across a barren, seemingly infinite landscape. The sun, harsh and unyielding, casts elongated shadows over the dunes. Somewhere in this desolate expanse, or perhaps far beyond it, a question lingers like a ghost from antiquity. What became of Rome's lost legion? This is the mystery of the vanished soldiers of Marcus Licinius Crassus, a story that begins in the unforgiving deserts of Parthia and ends no one knows where. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Roman history and a member of the first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, sought military glory to match his vast fortune. Turning his ambitions eastward, he launched a campaign against the Parthian Empire, the dominant power in what is now Iran. Crassus believed his legions would easily subdue the Parthians, but hubris, poor intelligence, and a lack of cavalry support doomed the campaign before it truly began. At Carrhae, near the modern border of Turkey and Syria, Crassus's force of over 40,000 men met the Parthian general Surena's much smaller army, composed largely of mounted archers and heavily armored cavalry. The results were catastrophic. Parthian arrows rained down relentlessly on the Roman formations. Their shields could not save them. Their counterattacks faltered. Crassus was killed, reportedly executed in brutal fashion, with molten gold poured down his throat as mockery for his greed. But perhaps the most enduring mystery of this defeat lies not in Crassus's death, but in the fate of a group of Roman soldiers, perhaps as many as 10,000, who were taken alive. The Parthians, unlike the Romans, often took prisoners rather than slaughtering defeated enemies wholesale. It's generally accepted that thousands of Roman legionaries survived the Battle of Carrhae and were marched deep into Parthian territory. Then, they vanished. Roman records say little of these men after that, and while a few ancient sources suggest prisoner exchanges or scattered attempts at return, there is no definitive trace of the legion's final fate. So what happened to them? Some historians believe they were enslaved or incorporated into Parthian border settlements. Others suggest they were used as mercenaries or military auxiliaries. skilled soldiers deployed along the eastern frontier of the Parthian Empire. But a far more curious and speculative theory began to take shape centuries later, one that reaches beyond the borders of Persia and into Central Asia. In 194 CE, a Chinese historian named Bon Gu recorded a most peculiar detail in the Book of the Later Han. In the chronicles of a battle between Chinese forces and a Central Asian army near the city of Jiji, modern-day Taraz in Kazakhstan, he describes a defensive formation used by the enemy, a fish scale pattern, highly reminiscent of the Roman testudo, or tortoise formation, in which soldiers overlap their shields on all sides and above, creating an armored shell. Why would a Central Asian army, likely composed of nomadic or steppe warriors, use such an unorthodox and disciplined Roman technique? Some scholars believe this strange account offers a tantalizing clue. Could it be that remnants of the Roman prisoners from Carrhae, stranded in a foreign empire and far from home, had marched even farther east and found new lives under new rulers? This line of speculation reached a fever pitch in the 20th century, when historians proposed that these lost legionaries may have been settled in a place the Chinese called Lycian, a name that bears resemblance to legion or Roma in phonetic form. Lycian, a town in modern-day Gansu province in China, became the center of a fringe theory that a community there had Roman ancestry. Visitors noted that some locals possessed lighter hair, aquiline noses, or deep-set eyes. In the early 2000s, genetic testing was performed on several residents. The results? Inconclusive. Some genes were consistent with Western Eurasian traits, but not definitively Roman. No Latin inscriptions were found, no Roman artifacts, only speculation, legend, and an enduring curiosity. Academic consensus remains cautious, leaning toward simpler explanations, that the Roman prisoners were likely absorbed into the Parthian military system or resettled in the frontier regions between the empires. The supposed eastward migration of Roman troops into China may simply be coincidence or the product of imaginative interpretation, but the tantalizing possibility remains. Could a unit of Roman soldiers, trained in discipline, organized in formation, carrying memories of the Republic, have made their way across Asia, adapting, surviving, and ultimately disappearing into the cultural melting pot of the Silk Road? Could they have influenced military tactics, merged with local populations, or perhaps even founded families that carry Roman bloodlines to this day? And why do some elements of Chinese military structure from later centuries bear striking resemblance to Roman strategies? Standing today in the windswept ruins of Carrhae, scattered stones, crumbled fortifications, you can almost hear the echoes of those lost men. Their language, their loyalties, their fate, gone without a trace. And in the far reaches of the Gansu corridor, where Chinese and Central Asian worlds once collided, the wind carries other whispers, not of facts, but of possibilities. What truly happened to the vanishing legion of Crassus? Was it a footnote to an imperial blunder, or the beginning of a transcontinental journey, lost to time but etched faintly in the legends of both East and West? Somewhere between the silence of the desert and the murmur of the Silk Road, perhaps. The answer still lies buried. The Hungarian plain stretches endlessly under a steel-gray sky. Cold winds sweep through tall grasses, bending them in waves as if stirred by memories buried beneath the soil. Somewhere out there, in a land once ruled by horsemen and warlords, lies a secret more than 1,500 years old, a tomb, a legend, or perhaps a death no one has ever truly understood. Attila the Hun, known to history as the Scourge of God, left a trail of devastation across Europe in the 5th century AD. His very name was enough to make Roman senators tremble, and his mounted armies thundered from the Danube to the gates of Constantinople, from the Balkans to Gaul. But for all the terror he inspired in life, the greatest mystery surrounding Attila may be what happened after his final conquest. For in 453 AD, on the night of his wedding, the mighty warlord died, without a wound, without a battle, and without warning. What, or who, really killed Attila? According to the Roman historian Priscus, who traveled to Attila's court and whose writings are among the most valuable first-hand accounts of the Huns, Attila died in his palace after a night of heavy celebration. He had just taken a new wife, named Ildiko, believed to be a young Gothic noblewoman, and retired with her to his private chambers. By morning, Attila was found dead. His body lay still, no sign of struggle, no trace of violence. Blood, it was said, had poured from his nose and mouth, drowning him in his own sleep. The official explanation? A violent nosebleed, death from excessive alcohol and internal hemorrhaging. In the absence of modern medicine, such a fate, though rare, was not impossible. It was explained away as natural causes, an accident, perhaps even divine judgment. But could the death of the most feared man in Europe have been so simple? To understand the mystery, we must first understand who Attila was. Born into the royal Hunnic line, he united disparate tribes under one ruthless banner. His empire, centered in the Carpathian Basin, rivaled Rome in strength. He demanded tribute from the Eastern Roman Empire and threatened the Western Roman capital itself. In 452 AD, he launched a brutal campaign into Italy, sacking cities and driving refugees toward Rome. Only the intervention of Pope Leo I, who met Attila personally, seems to have halted the invasion. The details of their encounter remain vague, but shortly afterward, Attila withdrew. Why? Was he bought off, persuaded, threatened by famine or plague, or did he sense his end was near? Within a year, he was dead. The mystery begins with inconsistencies in the historical record. The story of the nosebleed, passed down by Priscus, is curiously specific, but it also conveniently removes all suggestion of foul play. Is it likely that a warrior who had survived countless battles, brutal campaigns, and assassination attempts would perish alone in the night, suffocated by a trickle of blood? Some historians have speculated that Attila may have suffered from esophageal varices, a condition often related to heavy drinking, which can result in sudden, massive internal bleeding. Others propose high blood pressure, or even an aneurysm. These are plausible explanations, but they fail to account for the deeper tensions surrounding his final days. Attila's new bride, Ildiko, is central to the more conspiratorial theories. According to Gothic legend, she may have been part of a revenge plot, possibly orchestrated by those who had suffered at Attila's hands. Was she planted in his court? Could she have murdered the king and staged the scene to appear natural? There is no concrete evidence for this. Yet, the symbolism is potent. A Gothic woman delivering death to the man who had ravaged Gothic lands, a bloodless revenge for a blood-soaked reign. Others suggest that Attila's own generals or family may have had reasons to remove him. His growing paranoia, constant demands for tribute, and increasingly unstable behavior could have made him a liability, even to his own people. Was he poisoned? Smothered? Was the nosebleed story a cover, crafted to preserve his image or protect those involved? Then there is the enigma of Attila's burial. According to legend, his body was encased in 3 coffins, one of gold, one of silver, and one of iron, and buried under a riverbed, the waters temporarily diverted for the secret interment. After the ceremony, the slaves who carried out the burial were supposedly executed to ensure that no one would ever reveal the location. No trace of his tomb has ever been found. Despite centuries of searching, the final resting place of Attila remains one of history's greatest archaeological absences. Was it buried beneath the Tisa River, the Danube, hidden in the mountains, or does it lie undisturbed beneath some unassuming stretch of Hungarian farmland? Some have proposed that the Huns never buried Attila at all, that his body was hidden in plain sight, placed in a sacred cave or ancient forest shrine. Others believe that the story of the river burial is merely symbolic, crafted to echo earlier steppe traditions or mask the fact that his body may have been stolen, desecrated, or lost during a power struggle. Even in death, Attila seemed to invite fear. Many who searched for his tomb reportedly turned back, spooked by omens or sudden illness. Some local traditions even hold that disturbing Attila's grave would bring ruin, a curse unleashed upon the modern world. And so we are left with a haunting silence. A warrior who reshaped the world with fire and steel, slipping away quietly under mysterious circumstances, a tomb that may never be found, a bride whose name lingers in suspicion, and an empire that crumbled not long after its master was gone. Could it all truly be explained by chance? A freak medical event? Or was the death of Attila the Hun the result of careful planning, an inside betrayal, or divine retribution? As we trace the winds across the Hungarian steppe, we're left with only questions. Somewhere beneath this land, answers may still lie, wrapped in iron, silver, and gold, waiting for a time when the earth is ready to give them up. Until then, the death of Attila remains a riddle, a shadow at the edge of empire, fading into the mists of history. Thick morning fog rolls in over the Danube, curling like ghostly fingers around the remnants of ancient stone. A forgotten chapel lies nestled in the ruins of a long-abandoned convent in the Hungarian countryside. Ivy spills over its broken walls. Wildflowers push up through the earth where noble footsteps once fell. There is no plaque, no inscription, only silence. Yet some believe that this place may conceal the untold end of a princess whose name has all but vanished from history books, Anastasia of Kiev. Her life was written into the bloodlines of kingdoms. Her marriage helped forge political alliances between Kievan Rus and the rising powers of Central Europe. And yet, despite her prominence, the final chapter of her story is curiously, almost eerily, absent. Who was this princess? And why has the truth about her fate remained so elusive? Anastasia of Kiev was born in the early 11th century, daughter of Yaroslav the Wise, the Grand Prince of Kiev. Her family's legacy was formidable. Yaroslav married his daughters into the royal houses of Europe, creating a far-reaching web of diplomatic influence. One daughter became Queen of France. Another married the King of Hungary. And then there was Anastasia. Around 1038, she was wed to Andrew I of Hungary, a noble with ambitions to claim the throne. Their union was not only a marriage of status, but a carefully orchestrated move in the chessboard of medieval geopolitics. Anastasia's lineage brought prestige. Her Orthodox Christian background helped secure religious alliances, and her intelligence, by many accounts, gave her a powerful voice in court. When Andrew became king in 1046, Anastasia was crowned Queen Consort of Hungary. For years they ruled together, through famine, rebellion, and growing threats from within and beyond their borders. She bore him a son, Solomon, who would later become king in his own right. Her name appears in royal documents and church donations. She is even credited with helping bring the revered Saint Anastasia cult into Hungary, lending her spiritual legacy to the land she now called home. And then, she disappears. After the death of King Andrew in 1060, Hungary was plunged into a brutal civil war. Anastasia's son Solomon, still a child, was forced into exile. His cousins, the sons of Bela, seized power, and for a time, the kingdom fractured. Anastasia fled with Solomon to the Holy Roman Empire, seeking protection from Emperor Henry IV. There, in exile, her role shifted, from queen to political pawn. She negotiated tirelessly to restore her son's claim. Eventually, with imperial backing, Solomon returned to Hungary and was crowned in 1063. For a brief period, it seemed the tides had turned in Anastasia's favor. But her presence in the royal court diminishes after that point. Her name vanishes from the chronicles, her influence wanes, and though we know she lived beyond her son's ascension, we don't know how or where her story truly ended. Was she forced into retirement? Did she retreat to a convent? Was she sidelined by court politics? Or did something more mysterious occur? Tradition holds that Anastasia spent her final years in religious seclusion, possibly in a Benedictine abbey in Veszprém, or in the now-lost convent of Tihany on the shores of Lake Balaton. Monasteries were common places for widowed queens, both as places of devotion and quiet exile. But the records here are hazy. The documents of the time are either missing, redacted, or riddled with gaps. Her grave has never been definitively identified. Some 19th century accounts claimed a tomb attributed to her once stood beneath a collapsed chapel near the abbey ruins, but even those reports are speculative, lacking physical evidence or corroborating texts. Why would the burial of a queen, a foreign-born consort no less, be so completely lost? Was her status deliberately diminished in the power shifts that followed? Could her political maneuverings during her son's exile have made her a target? Did enemies erase her legacy? Or did she erase it herself, stepping into obscurity to escape the cutthroat world of dynastic politics? More fringe theories go further. Some believe Anastasia never returned to Hungary at all, that after Solomon's coronation, she was quietly sent to live out her days in Germany, perhaps under the eye of the emperor, possibly even imprisoned. There are rumors of a mysterious Russian lady recorded in obscure German monastic registries, though none mention her by name. Others propose an even darker turn. In the chaos of Hungary's shifting alliances, some suggest Anastasia may have been caught in a power play, silenced to protect new regimes. Could she have been assassinated? Or did she take holy vows under another name, her true identity buried in centuries of clerical anonymity? One theory links her to the Abbey of Admont in present-day Austria, founded in the mid-11th century and known for its acceptance of noble women from Eastern Europe. A mysterious benefactress listed in early charters appears with no surname, only described as of royal blood. Coincidence? Or clue? It is in the silence, the missing pages, the faint and crumbling inscriptions, that the mystery deepens. For a woman so integral to the shaping of dynasties, a queen, mother of a king, daughter of a legendary ruler, how can her final days be so completely unaccounted for? Even in the chaos of the 11th century, records of other queens survived. Churches were built over their tombs, their names etched in stone, but not Anastasia. Perhaps it is fitting, in a way. Born in a kingdom where East met West, she lived at the fault lines of language, faith, and empire. Her story, like so many of that age, is hidden beneath layers of conquest, rebellion, and silent erasure. The forests and hills of Hungary may still hold her secret, beneath a ruined chapel, within a forgotten manuscript, or beneath the lake's silvered surface. Did she die quietly, praying in seclusion? Was she betrayed by those she trusted, or did she simply choose to vanish from history, leaving only shadows in her wake? We may never know. But the absence she left behind speaks volumes, an invisible echo that calls across centuries, inviting us to wonder what else the past has quietly concealed. High in the cloud-wreathed Andes, stone walls rise from the earth like the vertebrae of some long-slain titan. Machu Picchu stands serene and haunting, perched above the Urubamba River Valley, its terraces clinging to the mountainside as though defying time itself. Mist gathers at dawn, spilling over the mossy peaks, and in the hush of the early hours, it's easy to imagine voices, echoes of royal footsteps, priestly chants and ancient rituals long silenced by conquest. But among the many enigmas surrounding the Inca civilization, one question lingers more than any other. What became of their royal bloodline? The Inca ruled over the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, an empire so vast and sophisticated it stretched from modern-day Colombia to Chile, linked by thousands of miles of roads, suspension bridges, and imperial outposts. At its heart stood a divine ruler, the Sapa Inca, believed to be the living son of the sun god, Inti. His authority was absolute, his lineage sacred, his genealogy meticulously preserved in oral traditions and quipus, knotted cords used to record data and stories. Yet, after the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, this mighty lineage seemingly vanished. How can a royal bloodline so central to an entire civilization's identity simply disappear? When Francisco Pizarro and his men arrived in 1532, they encountered an empire already strained by internal conflict. The Inca ruler, Huayna Capac, had recently died, likely of smallpox introduced by European contact, and his two sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, were locked in a brutal civil war over succession. Pizarro exploited this chaos. Atahualpa, having defeated his brother, was captured by the Spanish under the pretense of diplomacy. He offered a ransom so vast, rooms filled with gold and silver, that it stunned even the seasoned conquistadors. But even after receiving the treasure, the Spaniards executed him in 1533. This event marked not just the fall of a man, but the symbolic decapitation of an empire. The Sun King was dead, and with him, the divine order of Inca rule collapsed. But the bloodline didn't end there, at least not immediately. In the years that followed, the Spanish installed puppet emperors such as Manco Inca Yupanqui, who initially cooperated with colonial authorities. But Manco rebelled, fleeing into the mountains and establishing a remote Inca stronghold in Vilcabamba, a secret city hidden in the jungles beyond Cusco. There, from 1537 to 1572, the so-called Neo-Inca state held out against Spanish rule, a shadow court clinging to ancient traditions in the face of cultural annihilation. It was a desperate resistance. Manco Inca's sons, Sayri Tupac, Titu Cusi, and finally Tupac Amaru I, ruled in exile. They preserved the rites, the rituals, and perhaps the dream of eventual restoration. But in 1572, the Spanish finally located Vilcabamba, captured Tupac Amaru, and beheaded him in the plaza of Cusco. His death was intended as a final statement. The royal bloodline of the Inca was extinguished. Or was it? Strangely, this is where the story blurs. Spanish chroniclers were meticulous in some accounts, recording executions, missionary conversions, and rebel uprisings in vivid detail. Yet, they were oddly vague about the wider royal family. Some references suggest that children of Tupac Amaru were taken into custody, baptized, and absorbed into colonial society. Others were sent to convents or monasteries. But after that, silence. The line may have continued, quietly. There are whispers in Andean villages of noble bloodlines maintained in secret, families that trace their ancestry back to the Sapa Inca through oral histories passed down for generations. In remote highland communities, certain surnames, Yupanqui, Atauchi, Cusi, still carry weight. Some have produced scholars, artists, and even political leaders who claim descent from the old empire, though rarely with official recognition. Could the royal line have survived underground, blending into the very people it once ruled? One of the most intriguing stories emerges from the colonial period. In the 18th century, a charismatic leader named José Gabriel Condorcanqui adopted the name Tupac Amaru II and led a massive rebellion against Spanish rule. He claimed to be a direct descendant of the last Inca king. Though his uprising ultimately failed, and he was captured and gruesomely executed, his legacy endured. Was his claim legitimate? Or was it symbolic, a rallying cry for Andean resistance? Historians remain divided. Some suggest he came from a noble but not royal family. Others believe his lineage was real and that the Spanish destroyed not just his body, but any documentation that could support his claim. But the question persists. If someone like Condor Kanki could have descended from the last Inca, who else might have? In the modern era, new tools have been brought to the mystery. Genetic studies of indigenous populations in Peru and Ecuador have attempted to map ancient lineages, seeking markers that could be linked to Inca royalty. But without a known, confirmed sample from a royal burial, there is no definitive baseline to compare against. Many of the royal mummies, once venerated in Cusco and carried in public processions, were destroyed by Spanish authorities in their effort to erase idolatry. Still, some speculate that hidden tombs remain, buried deep in mountain caves or sacred valleys that even today remain inaccessible. Occasionally, rumors surface of sealed chambers uncovered in remote areas, or of private families holding artifacts too dangerous to reveal. Could one of these still hold the remains of an Inca king? Could preserved DNA finally confirm a living descendant? There are even more speculative theories. Some fringe researchers suggest the Inca elite had secret routes leading beyond the Andes, into the heart of the Amazon, areas still largely unexplored by archaeologists. They argue that survivors may have fled even farther than Vilcabamba, disappearing into the jungle with their knowledge, rituals, and bloodlines intact. These stories are difficult to verify, but they persist in local legend, told in whispers from elder to child. What if the final refuge of the Inca royal house lies not in a known city or tomb, but in a place yet to be found? In the vast silence of the Andes, where ancient stones still catch the first light of dawn and condors wheel above mist-filled valleys, the question lingers. Was the Inca royal line truly extinguished, or merely hidden? Perhaps in a remote village, someone walks the earth today, unaware that they carry the blood of sun kings. Or perhaps the last heirs chose obscurity, sacrificing their names so their people might endure. We may never find the proof, but the echoes remain, woven into the land, carried in the names, and hidden in the hearts of those still watching the mountains with quiet reverence. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the desolate hills of Hisarlik, a lonely rise of earth in northwestern Turkey. Stones, bleached pale by time, poke through the dry grass like the vertebrae of something ancient and long buried. The wind whispers over the ridge, carrying with it the scent of dust, salt, and forgotten glory. To the untrained eye, this might seem like any other mound among the hills of the Troad. But beneath this unassuming landscape lie the layered remnants of a city whose name has echoed through the ages, Troy. And yet, for centuries, many doubted it ever existed. The story of the Trojan War, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, is one of the most enduring legends of the ancient world. A war fought over a beautiful woman, Helen, said to be the most beautiful mortal ever born, between the mighty Greek kingdoms and the proud city of Troy. Heroes clashed under the gaze of gods: Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, the wrath of men, the betrayal of a wooden horse, the burning of a city. But how much of it was real? And how much is poetry stitched together from fragments of memory and imagination? For centuries, scholars regarded the Trojan War as a myth, a product of Homeric storytelling rather than historical truth. But in the 19th century, a man driven by obsession set out to prove otherwise. In 1870, Heinrich Schliemann, a German businessman turned amateur archaeologist, arrived at Hisarlik armed with ancient texts and a singular conviction that this was the true site of Troy. Digging feverishly, he uncovered a succession of cities layered atop one another, each older than the last, revealing a timeline of destruction and rebirth stretching back thousands of years. Among the rubble, Schliemann claimed to discover Priam's treasure, a cache of gold and jewels he attributed to the Trojan king of Homer's tale. He photographed his wife wearing the artifacts, calling her Helen of Troy reborn. But modern archaeologists remain skeptical. The treasure, they say, belonged to a city that predates Homer's narrative by centuries, and Schliemann, for all his enthusiasm, was careless, destroying valuable strata in his haste to reach what he believed was the Homeric level. Still, the site he uncovered was real, and the cities beneath Hisarlik did burn. So the question lingers, was there a historical war behind the legend? In the decades that followed, more careful excavations revealed that Hisarlik was no fantasy. The city that existed there, Troy VI and Troy VII, was wealthy, strategically located, and possessed formidable defensive walls. It stood at the entrance to the Dardanelles, a narrow strait that would have been vital to ancient maritime trade. Controlling Troy meant controlling access between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Is it possible that this economic choke point, rather than the face of Helen, was the real cause of conflict? Some historians argue that the Trojan War was not a single dramatic event, but a memory of repeated clashes between Mycenaean Greeks and Anatolian powers. Others suggest that Troy may have been an ally of the Hittites, the powerful Bronze Age empire based in central Anatolia, and that Greek raids were part of a wider pattern of destabilization in the late Bronze Age world. Hittite tablets, unearthed from Boazkoi, the ancient Hittite capital, mention a city called Wilusa, which many believe to be a rendering of Ilios, the name Homer uses for Troy. They refer to a ruler named Alexandru, possibly echoing the name Alexandros, another name for Paris of Troy. These texts describe diplomatic tensions, shifting alliances, and border conflicts, suggesting a complex political landscape not unlike the one Homer dramatizes. But nowhere do they confirm a war over a woman or the epic siege described in the Iliad. Still, could these dry administrative records be the bureaucratic echo of a poetic tragedy? Then there's the famous wooden horse, a clever ruse, a metaphor, or something else entirely. Some scholars suggest the horse was a battering ram or siege engine. Others believe it may have been a forgotten earthquake, the gift of Poseidon, god of the sea and of tremors, that cracked Troy's walls from within. In ancient literature, symbolism often cloaked reality. Could the horse be a code, preserved by bards and poets, for something now lost in translation? The Iliad itself does not describe the fall of Troy. That story belongs to later texts, like the Aeneid of Virgil and the Little Iliad, now lost except in fragments. Homer ends his poem with Hector's funeral. The rest, Achilles' death, the ruse of the horse, the burning of the city, is passed down through oral tradition and later storytelling. It is here that myth and memory swirl together, each shaping the other in a centuries-long echo, and perhaps most intriguingly, if the Trojan War did happen, what was left behind? Archaeological layers at Hisarlik show signs of a violent destruction around 1180 BC. Fires, collapsed buildings, arrowheads embedded in stone. A siege? A civil war? The timing coincides with the broader Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious period when great civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean fell into ruin. Mycenae, Ugarit, Hattusa, even parts of Egypt suffered. Was the fall of Troy part of this wider catastrophe? A symptom or a spark? Some theorists go even further, pointing to the elusive Sea Peoples mentioned in Egyptian records, marauding groups that swept across the region, leaving devastation in their wake. Could these invaders have included displaced Mycenaeans, or even the very Greeks who once laid siege to Troy? Speculative theories abound. that the Trojan War was not one war, but many, that it never happened at all, or that Troy was not a city, but an idea, a symbol for the twilight of the Bronze Age world. But the ruins remain, silent, watching. Today, as the sun sets over Hisarlik and the fields of the Troad fade into twilight, the stones catch fire in golden light. Tourists walk the ancient ramparts. They touch the walls. They gaze down at the deep trenches carved into the earth by decades of excavation. And they wonder, did Achilles truly rage here? Did Hector fall within these walls? Was there ever a Helen? Or is the true mystery not whether the Trojan War happened, but how myth and memory have conspired to keep its story alive for over 3,000 years? Somewhere between fact and legend, the city endures, a whisper of war, love, and loss, waiting for the world to finally understand what really happened on these haunted shores. The mist rolls in over the jagged cliffs of the Pontic Mountains, where the land tumbles steeply into the dark waters of the Black Sea. Along these ancient shores, the city of Trebizond, modern-day Trabzon in northeastern Turkey, rises like a dream out of time. Red-roofed homes cling to hillsides, Byzantine fortresses crumble into ivy, and deep within its tangled past lies a story few have heard, a tale of royal blood, imperial collapse, and disappearance. What happened to the Romanovs of Trebizond? To ask that question is to step into a curious overlap of history, myth, and the long shadow of empire. The Romanov name is, of course, most often associated with the Russian imperial family, culminating in the tragic execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his children in 1918. But centuries before that, and far to the south, a different Romanov legacy may have taken root. Some records, fragmented, debated, and often dismissed, hint at a possible offshoot of the Romanov family that fled persecution or political upheaval in Muscovy and settled in the relative safety of the Pontic region. According to this shadowy tradition, they intermarried with local Greek, Georgian, and Armenian noble families who had long dwelled in the mountainous fortress cities of the former Byzantine Empire. It is here, in Trebizond, that this branch of the Romanovs is said to have survived and eventually vanished. To understand the gravity of this mystery, we must step back in time. Trebizond was not merely a remote outpost. It was once the seat of an empire. After the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204, the Byzantine world fractured. From the chaos emerged the Empire of Trebizond, founded by the Komnenos dynasty, Greek royalty who claimed to be the rightful heirs of the Byzantine legacy. Trebizond endured for more than 2.5 centuries, until 1461, when it fell to the Ottomans under Mehmed II, the same sultan who conquered Constantinople. Its royal family was exiled or absorbed into the Ottoman system. But like so many pieces of imperial collapse, some threads were left hanging. Some lines were never fully extinguished. Could a later Romanov lineage, perhaps obscure, illegitimate, or intentionally hidden, have woven itself into that ancient imperial tapestry? In the early 18th century, Russian documents reference a mysterious envoy sent to the Black Sea coast, reportedly to locate lost kin. The mission was kept quiet. The records are vague, but they speak of a princely family residing in the Trabzon region, noble in bearing, fluent in Russian and Greek, and maintaining rituals that echoed both Orthodox and Byzantine court traditions. Could this have been a forgotten Romanov line? A family spared from the turbulence of Moscow's political purges? Most historians remain skeptical. They point to the lack of concrete evidence, the murkiness of oral traditions, and the fluid identities of noble families in the volatile Caucasus and Black Sea regions. After all, many Christian nobles of Georgian or Pontic Greek origin adopted Slavic names and customs over time. The resemblance may be coincidence, the stories embellishment, and yet the trail does not fully vanish. In 1829, during the Russo-Turkish War, Russian officers stationed near Trebizond reportedly made contact with a local family who claimed descent from the Romanovs, not the immediate ruling house, but from a collateral branch exiled generations earlier. They lived modestly, but with certain privileges, protected by Ottoman officials, respected by Orthodox clergy. Strangely, this family disappears from official records shortly after. No grave markers, no land titles, just silence. Why? Was this just another noble family caught in the shifting allegiances of empires? Or was something deliberately concealed? Some suggest that the family chose to vanish, fearing entanglement in Russian politics. Others propose they were quietly removed, either by Russian agents seeking to erase inconvenient claimants, or by Ottoman authorities wary of foreign entanglements on their borders. A few even whisper that one or more members fled deeper into the mountains, into the monasteries of Semela or Vasalon, hidden in pine-covered ravines where monks preserved older traditions and secrets in silence. Those sanctuaries, nestled in the cliffs above Trebizond, hold libraries of manuscripts rarely studied by modern scholars. Could the truth still lie buried there? In the early 20th century, a Turkish archaeologist exploring ruins outside Moscow uncovered a cache of letters written in archaic Russian script, bound with wax seals bearing a double-headed eagle, similar but not identical to the Romanov crest. These documents were never fully translated. The box they were stored in was reportedly taken by Ottoman officials, and its contents remain unaccounted for. Then came the wars, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the reshaping of borders. Amid this chaos, the trail grew cold. But not entirely. In the 1970s, a private collector in Tbilisi claimed to own a portrait of a noblewoman painted in the early 19th century. She was dressed in a style combining Georgian, Ottoman, and Russian elements, a peculiar blend of court traditions. On the back of the canvas was a faded inscription, Maria N. Romanova of Trebizond. The painting's authenticity has never been verified. It was sold at auction to a European buyer and disappeared into a private collection. Is it a forgery? A misplaced identity? Or a rare glimpse of a lineage thought lost? And even if a Romanov branch once survived in Trebizond, what happened to them? Did they assimilate? Escape? Were they silenced? Today, the walls of Trebizond still stand, weathered and broken, yet defiant. The city hums with life, its streets echoing with Turkish, Laz, and Pontic dialects. But if you listen closely, especially among the older generations in the mountain villages, stories still surface of a noble house that once lived apart, that spoke the language of the czars, that kept to themselves and left no graves behind. They are stories told in hushed tones, as if remembering them might stir something best left buried. But history has a way of returning when least expected. Was the Romanov bloodline of Trebizond real? Or just a reflection of imperial nostalgia projected onto the misty mountains of the Black Sea? And if it was real, might its descendants still be walking among us, hidden in plain sight, their legacy waiting to be uncovered? The wind stirs gently across the narrow pass of Thermopylae, brushing over weathered stones and dry, yellowed grass. To the untrained eye, it is an unremarkable landscape, just another stretch of rugged terrain tucked between mountains and sea in central Greece. But here, nearly 2.5 millennia ago, legends were forged in blood and fire. This is where 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, made their final stand against the vast armies of the Persian Empire. It is a tale echoed across centuries, etched into history, retold in poetry, and immortalized in sculpture and stone. And yet, despite all that we know, or think we know, one question lingers like a shadow over the legacy of that final stand. Where were the 300 laid to rest? And why has their burial site seemingly vanished? The Battle of Thermopylae, fought in 480 BC, is perhaps the most famous last stand in military history. According to Herodotus, the Spartans, alongside a few hundred Thespians and other Greek allies, held off tens of thousands of Persian troops for 3 days before being overwhelmed. Leonidas and his warriors fought to the last man. The site of the battle is well known. The pass, once so narrow it forced invaders into bottlenecks, has shifted due to sedimentation from the Spercheios River. The ancient coastline now lies further inland, but archaeologists have pinpointed the general area where the clash occurred. A simple stone monument marks the spot today, bearing the famous epitaph, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." But where precisely do they lie? That's the mystery. For centuries, it was believed that the 300 Spartans were buried on the battlefield, their graves marked by ceremonial mounds. The ancients were meticulous in honoring fallen warriors, especially those who had died in such valor. Even Herodotus mentions the burial of the dead at Thermopylae, noting that 2 monuments were raised in their honor. Yet no definitive burial site, no bones, no armor, no funeral markers, has ever been conclusively found for the 300. Archaeologists have searched, surveys have been conducted, excavations launched. Still, silence. Some theorize that the original burial site was lost to time, eroded by shifting riverbeds, covered by centuries of flood deposits, or repurposed during Roman and Byzantine times when stones were routinely taken from older graves for new construction. Others suggest the graves may never have existed in the traditional sense. Could it be that the 300 were left where they fell, their bodies defiled or burned by the Persians? Or perhaps their remains were later collected and returned to Sparta for burial, leaving no trace at Thermopylae at all? There is some precedence for that. Sparta, unlike many other Greek city-states, maintained strict burial customs and returning fallen warriors to their homeland for burial. Especially royalty like Leonidas was not unthinkable. In fact, we know that Leonidas's remains were eventually brought back to Sparta around 40 years after the battle. A shrine, or Heron, was built in his honor in the city. But what of the others? Why does no grave, no shrine, no marker, nothing remain? In 1939, Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos conducted a major excavation at Thermopylae. He discovered hundreds of Persian arrowheads and some human bones, but they were scattered and unidentifiable. No definitive Spartan burial pit was uncovered. In the decades since, multiple theories have emerged. One suggests that the Spartans, in their highly disciplined retreat to death, may have chosen a specific location for their final stand, perhaps on higher ground, and were burned there. If so, the ashes may have been scattered or buried in a mound now lost beneath layers of soil. Satellite imaging has identified irregular terrain anomalies in the region, but none have yielded conclusive results. Another theory proposes that early Christian communities in the area intentionally destroyed or obscured pagan war memorials, viewing them as relics of a militaristic, polytheistic past. Could the burial site have been desecrated, its stones repurposed for churches or monasteries? Or was the site hidden deliberately? In local folklore passed down through generations, there are whispered tales of a sacred hill where warrior bones were once said to lie. Some versions speak of curses placed upon those who disturbed the ground. Others mention a hidden chamber, sealed within a cliffside, where the bodies of fallen heroes were placed, not for public worship, but for eternal silence. No such chamber has been found, yet the idea persists. In recent years, independent researchers and amateur historians have proposed that the Spartans may have employed secret burial rites, perhaps even ones known only to elite warrior castes. Could their remains have been entombed in a location far from the battlefield, one guarded not by stone or inscription, but by silence? The Spartans were, after all, a society built on secrecy. Their military training, their internal politics, even aspects of their religion, much was hidden from outsiders. What if their final rites were too? There is also the intriguing possibility that modern assumptions are clouded by Romanticism. The story of the 300, shaped by later Greek historians, Western art, and nationalist retellings, may bear only partial resemblance to the truth. Could it be that the number wasn't exactly 300? That the men came from more varied origins than we assume? That the burial story was, in part, a fabrication to glorify sacrifice? Or, conversely, could something have been discovered and quietly removed? In the early 20th century, British military engineers stationed near Thermopylae during the Greco-Turkish War reportedly unearthed a strange, stone-lined chamber during trench work. It was quickly sealed again. No official records exist, but a few surviving letters from soldiers mention old bones and a forgotten tomb. Whether these accounts are real or embellished remains unknown. Today, visitors still come to Thermopylae to pay their respects, standing before the bronze statue of Leonidas, facing the modern highway that cuts through the ancient pass. But few realize that beneath the dust and heat lies an unresolved enigma. The men who gave their lives here changed the course of history. Their courage became myth, but their final resting place remains a ghost. Were they buried in secret, lost to the earth? Or was the story we were told never quite the truth to begin with? The Tower of London rises like a stern sentinel against the murky Thames, its pale stone walls weathered by time and touched by the memories of centuries. It is a place of crowns and betrayals, of oaths whispered in candlelit chambers, and of secrets buried behind thick, unyielding walls. At night, the river mists curl around its battlements, as if trying to draw the truth from within. It was here, behind these very walls, that a young boy king vanished. King Edward V, barely 12 years old, crowned only in title, never in ceremony, he would disappear into the depths of the tower alongside his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, and never be seen again. What happened to them? Were they murdered, hidden, or spirited away under cover of darkness? And who, if anyone, had the most to gain from their vanishing? Edward V was born into turbulence. The year was 1470. England was in the grip of the Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil conflict between the rival houses of York and Lancaster, both claiming the right to the throne. His father, Edward IV, had seized and lost power more than once. But by the time young Edward was crowned Prince of Wales, his family's fortunes had seemingly stabilized. That illusion shattered in April 1483. Edward IV died unexpectedly. His 12-year-old son, Edward V, became king in name. But a child cannot rule alone. A protector was needed, someone to guard both throne and boy. Enter Richard, Duke of Gloucester. The late king's brother, Richard was granted the title of Lord Protector. His reputation was that of a loyal, pious man, skilled in battle, uncorrupted by courtly excess. But within weeks of Edward IV's death, a power struggle erupted, and what followed would echo through English history as one of its most chilling royal mysteries. The young king was on his way to London when he was intercepted by Richard. What was meant to be a gentle transition became a tightening noose. Richard seized control of Edward's retinue, dismissed his advisors, and took the boy under his custody. He was brought to the Tower of London, ostensibly to prepare for his coronation. His younger brother Richard soon joined him, but no coronation came. Instead, Parliament declared both princes illegitimate. Their parents' marriage was invalidated on claims of pre-contract, and the throne passed to Richard, now King Richard III. From that moment onward, the two boys were never seen in public again. What became of them? That question has haunted historians and investigators for over 5 centuries. The official record falls disturbingly silent. The boys' names vanish from court documents. No funeral, no witness, no confession. Only silence. The first wave of rumors spread quickly. Claims that the princes had been murdered in their sleep, smothered with pillows or strangled by unknown hands. One account, written years later by Sir Thomas More, claimed that Richard III ordered their death and that the deed was carried out by 2 men, Sir James Tyrrell and an accomplice. They allegedly buried the bodies beneath a staircase within the tower, but Thomas More was writing under the rule of Henry VIII, whose father had taken the throne from Richard III. Could his account be shaped by politics, propaganda, and where was the proof? In 1674, during renovations at the tower, workmen discovered a wooden box beneath a staircase in the White Tower. Inside were 2 small human skeletons. The bones were interred at Westminster Abbey as the likely remains of the princes. But no forensic analysis was possible at the time. In modern years, requests to re-examine the remains using DNA techniques have been repeatedly denied by the Abbey and the royal family. So, are the bones really theirs? Or were they simply the remains of children buried for other forgotten reasons in a place so heavily layered with death? If Richard III had them killed, why was no accusation made in his lifetime? Why were there no contemporary records of this crime? Richard ruled for just 2 years before being killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, and his reputation has long been shaped by Tudor historians who viewed him as a usurper and villain. But what if he didn't do it? What if someone else had reason to silence the boys? One possibility is Henry Tudor, later Henry VII, who defeated Richard III and married Edward V's sister, Elizabeth of York, to unite the warring houses. If the princes were alive, their claim to the throne would have undermined Henry's entire reign. Could they have been alive after Richard's death and eliminated by Henry instead? Or could they have survived? There are whispers, half-remembered accounts, and odd sightings of 2 boys being seen leaving the tower in secret. Foreign ambassadors in the 1490s reported rumors that one or both of the princes had escaped. Some even believed that one of them re-emerged as Perkin Warbeck, a pretender to the throne who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. He gained support across Europe and led an uprising against Henry VII before being captured and executed. Was Warbeck an imposter? Or something more? There's also the theory that the boys were hidden by loyalists, spirited away to Flanders or Brittany under assumed identities, kept in safety in the hope that they might one day return. But if they did survive, why did they never resurface with irrefutable proof? Why was no serious attempt made to reclaim the throne? And what of the bones? If they are not the princes, then whose are they? Today, the Tower of London still holds its secrets. Tourists walk the stone corridors where Edward and Richard were last seen. Yeoman warders recount the tales of betrayal and death. And in the shadows of those ancient walls, the fate of 2 boys, kings by blood, pawns in a deadly game, remains a question without a satisfying answer. Was it murder? A cover-up? A lost chance at survival? Or was it something stranger still? Something history has yet to reveal? Let's go further still. The next mystery lies deep within the Mediterranean, beneath ruins scorched by legend and fire. In the golden light of early morning, the rolling hills of Tuscany shimmer with mist. cypress trees rise like silent sentinels above ancient vineyards, and stone paths wind through quiet olive groves. But beneath this picturesque Italian landscape lies something older than Rome, older even than Latin memory itself. Carved into the soft tufa rock are doorways that lead into tombs. Chambers painted with scenes of banquets, dancers, and underworld gods. These are not Roman. These are Etruscan. Who were the Etruscans? Why does their language remain largely unreadable? And how did such a sophisticated civilization disappear, leaving behind only fragments and silence? Long before the rise of the Roman Empire, the Etruscans ruled central Italy. From approximately the 8th to the 3rd century BC, they developed a thriving urban society across what is now Tuscany, northern Lazio, and parts of Umbria. They built cities, traded across the Mediterranean, and shaped a culture that would later influence Rome itself, in architecture, religion, and even government. Yet despite their prominence, the Etruscans remain one of the most mysterious civilizations of the ancient world. Their origins, their language, and the nature of their society have all eluded full understanding. How is it that a people so advanced could vanish so thoroughly from historical memory? The Greeks called them Tyrannoi. The Romans knew them as Etrusci or Tusci. But what did they call themselves? The answer lies in their own inscriptions, Rasenna. But beyond this single word, their self-identification is clouded in ambiguity. The Etruscan language is non-Indo-European, unrelated to Latin, Greek, or any of the major language families of Europe. While thousands of inscriptions survive on urns, mirrors, plaques, and tombs, most are short and formulaic. Names, dedications, rituals. The Rosetta Stone offered no help here. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, Etruscan remains stubbornly isolated. We can pronounce it, but do we truly understand what it says? Classical writers themselves puzzled over the Etruscans. Herodotus, the Greek historian, claimed they were immigrants from Lydia, in what is now western Turkey. According to him, famine drove them across the sea under the leadership of a man named Tyrrhenus, hence the name the Greeks gave them. The Lydian theory suggests a Near Eastern origin, a seaborne migration, and cultural exchange that would explain the Etruscans' advanced metallurgy and seafaring abilities. But was Herodotus simply repeating a local legend? Or did he preserve a grain of forgotten history? In contrast, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a Roman Greek historian writing in the 1st century BC, argued that the Etruscans were autochthonous, that is, native to Italy. He dismissed the idea of foreign arrival, suggesting instead that they had always been there, developing independently and distinctively. Modern archaeology has offered support for both positions and raised new questions. Excavations in Etruria have revealed cities built on a grand scale. Stone walls, sophisticated drainage systems, and temples with ornate terracotta decorations. They traded extensively with Greeks, Phoenicians, and Carthaginians. Etruscan tombs, such as those in Cerveteri and Tarquinia, are marvels of design, some mimicking the layout of domestic homes, others decorated with vivid frescoes of dancers, banquets, and mythical creatures. Yet their burial customs speak to a society deeply preoccupied with the afterlife. What did they believe about death? And why did they choose to leave behind such elaborate visual records? But no historical texts? The lack of surviving Etruscan literature is one of the greatest puzzles. We know they had books, made of linen, known as libri lintei, but almost none have survived. One rare fragment, preserved by chance in the wrappings of a mummy discovered in Egypt, gives us a glimpse into Etruscan script, but still no clear answers. What happened to their libraries? Were they destroyed deliberately, absorbed by Rome and erased? Or do they still lie hidden, buried beneath layers of Italian soil, waiting to be discovered? genetic studies have added another layer of intrigue. DNA analysis of ancient Etruscan remains suggests close affinities with other ancient Italic populations, pointing to long-term local development. But more recent studies also show possible links to Anatolian populations, reviving Herodotus's Lydian theory with scientific weight. Could both accounts be partially true? Might the Etruscans have emerged from a blending of indigenous Italians and Eastern migrants? This synthesis of fact and myth, origin and absorption, creates a tantalizing ambiguity. Even more puzzling is the abruptness with which the Etruscans faded from history. By the 3rd century BC, their cities were steadily absorbed into the expanding Roman Republic. But the fall was not sudden or violent. It was gradual and largely administrative. The Etruscans were assimilated. Their gods merged with Roman deities. Their elites adopted into Roman society. But the culture itself, the heart of who they were, slowly disappeared. No final battle, no cataclysm, just a soft eclipse. And in that silence, the mystery deepens. Speculative theories have taken root in this absence. Some suggest the Etruscans had access to forgotten knowledge, celestial navigation, advanced engineering, esoteric rituals. Others link them to Atlantis, or to vanished sea peoples who once roamed the Mediterranean during the Bronze Age collapse. These theories remain on the fringe, lacking clear evidence. But they reflect the enduring fascination with a civilization that left behind so much art, so much beauty, and so few words. Why would a people of such refinement leave behind no epic, no history, no mythic poetry? Or did they, only for Rome to rewrite it all in Latin? Today, visitors walk among Etruscan ruins scattered across the hills of central Italy. In the museums of Florence, Rome, and Volterra, Etruscan bronzes and ceramics whisper of a people who once shaped the fate of a peninsula. Yet their voices remain elusive. In every silent tomb, in every undeciphered inscription, the question lingers. Who were the Ravenna? Were they the heirs of lost migrations, or the native soul of Italy before Rome rose from its hills? Until the script is broken, until the linen books are found, we may never fully know. But perhaps, beneath some untouched hill or hidden vault, the Etruscans are still waiting to speak. And so we look on, beyond the ruins into the silence, wondering what other truths lie just beneath the surface. As the sun sets over the crumbling ruins of ancient Caesarea, the last golden rays catch the worn stone of what was once a palace by the sea. The waves lap gently against the shore, whispering through time. Here, in the eastern reaches of the Roman world, the memory of a forgotten queen lingers, one whose name is rarely spoken, and whose story remains shrouded in uncertainty. Cleopatra Selene, daughter of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony, born of the most infamous romance in classical history. And yet, her fate vanishes into the folds of history with barely a trace. What became of the last living link to Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty? How did the daughter of such titanic figures disappear into silence? And could her legacy be far more expansive than we ever imagined? Cleopatra Selene was born into chaos in 40 BC, a child of two powerful parents who stood on the losing side of a brutal conflict. After the deaths of Cleopatra and Antony in 30 BC, Octavian, soon to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, took Selene and her twin brother Alexander Helios to Rome. They were paraded in his triumph, symbols of his victory over Egypt, and then, curiously, were raised not as prisoners, but as members of the imperial household. It is here the story grows more complex. While her brother disappears from the record entirely, Cleopatra Selene's future takes an unexpected turn. Augustus marries her off to Juba II, a North African prince and Roman ally. Together they become king and queen of Mauritania, a Roman client kingdom that encompassed parts of present-day Algeria and Morocco. And just like that, a child born in Alexandria, a living heir of the pharaohs, becomes a queen in a land thousands of miles from the Nile. At first glance, Cleopatra Selene's story appears to end here. A royal marriage, a foreign court, and a queen who ruled peacefully alongside her husband. Coins were minted in her name. Temples were erected in her honor. Inscriptions speak of her learning, her beauty, her noble lineage. But as we look closer, shadows emerge. Although she ruled for nearly 2 decades, Cleopatra Selene vanishes from historical texts around 5 BC. After that year, her name ceases to appear on coins. Her presence in inscriptions becomes more scarce. And then, silence. Was it death that claimed her, or something more? Mainstream historians assume she died sometime shortly after 5 BC, perhaps in childbirth or due to illness. Yet the exact year, cause, and even place of her death remain unrecorded. No grave has ever been conclusively linked to her. No tomb has been found in Mauritania that bears her name. Her husband, Juba II, lived on until 23 AD, but he too left behind no detailed account of her passing. In a culture and time where rulers were often honored with grand burials and monuments, how could Cleopatra Selene, a queen of royal Ptolemaic and Roman blood, simply vanish without a trace? Some have speculated that her memory was deliberately erased. Was there a political shift in Rome that made her name dangerous once again? Could her ties to Egypt and to a legacy of rebellion against Roman authority have led to her quiet removal from the historical stage? Or might there have been internal tensions in Mauritania itself? As a queen descended from both the Greek and Egyptian traditions, ruling over a Berber and Romanized populace, Cleopatra Selene walked a delicate cultural tightrope. Could her disappearance be the result of political upheaval or court intrigue? The absence of evidence leaves room for further speculation. There are even those who suggest that Cleopatra Selene's influence was far greater and more enduring than traditional sources allow. Some fringe theorists argue that she left behind a lineage that intermingled with the ruling houses of North Africa, and that elements of Egyptian religious symbolism that appear in later Berber kingdoms can be traced back to her reign. Others believe she left a hidden tomb, perhaps one filled with Ptolemaic treasures, lost texts, or even clues to the fate of her twin brother. A few even speculate that she may not have died in Mauritania at all, but returned in secret to Egypt, seeking to restore her family's legacy in some distant, forgotten corner of the land of the Nile. No evidence supports these claims directly, and yet they linger, like echoes in the silence. One tantalizing possibility is that her tomb does exist, but has yet to be identified. A massive, partially collapsed mausoleum near modern-day Tipasa in Algeria is believed to be her resting place. Known as the Royal Mausoleum of Mauritania, it is an enormous circular structure that once featured a conical roof and elaborate carvings. Juba too is widely believed to have been buried there. But was Cleopatra Selene buried alongside him? No inscriptions naming her have ever been found at the site. Looted in antiquity, the mausoleum's contents are long gone. Yet some archaeologists argue that its style, a blend of Egyptian, Hellenistic, and local architectural traditions, is a fitting tribute to Cleopatra Selene's unique identity. The fusion of cultures found in its design echoes her lineage and life, daughter of Alexandria, wife of a Berber king, and queen in the Roman world. Is it possible that her body lies there still, unknown, unnamed? Or might her true burial place remain hidden beneath layers of soil, awaiting rediscovery? The mystery of Cleopatra Selene's fate lingers precisely because she stands at the crossroads of so many histories. She was the final flicker of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last queen of Egypt by blood, raised in Rome, ruling in Africa, born of the East but married to the West. She is, in many ways, a mirror of the ancient world's transformation, from Hellenistic kingdoms to Roman domination. And yet, in all that change, her story disappears. Is it because she chose silence? Or because history, written by the victors, simply turned the page? In the ruins of Caesarea, Tipasa, and Volubilis, whispers of Cleopatra. Selene may still drift on the wind. In the coins that bear her profile, in the fragments of statues with Greco-Egyptian features, in the fading paint of desert tombs, clues to her life may remain, scattered like pieces of a forgotten mosaic. But until one piece unmistakably bears her name, until a burial inscription is found, or a lost manuscript emerges, we are left with questions. What truly became of Cleopatra Selene? And could it be that the last pharaoh's daughter still holds secrets the ancient world was never meant to forget? Beneath the overcast skies of northern England, the river Derwent winds through quiet fields near the village of Stamford Bridge. Today, the land is serene. Rolling hills, patches of woodland, and the soft rustle of wind through grass. But in the autumn of 1066, this peaceful valley was soaked in blood. The sounds of clashing steel, war cries, and dying men echoed across the banks as two armies collided in a brutal struggle that would mark the twilight of the Viking Age. And at the center of it all stood one man, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, a warrior forged in fire, shaped by exile, conquest, and ambition. His death at Stamford Bridge marked not only the end of an era, but the beginning of a mystery that has endured for nearly 1,000 years. What became of his body? How could a king so legendary vanish without a trace? Harald Sigurdsson, better known as Harald Hardrada, Hard Ruler, was no ordinary monarch. Born around 1015, he was the half-brother of Olaf II, Norway's patron saint. As a young man, Harald fought at the Battle of Stiklestad, survived defeat and exile, and carved out a reputation as a ruthless and brilliant commander in the Byzantine Empire's elite Varangian Guard. From Constantinople to the steppes of the Rus, his sword left scars across continents. When he returned to Norway and claimed the throne, he ruled with iron discipline and grand ambition. Yet his eyes always lingered westward, toward England. In 1066, following a disputed claim to the English crown, Harald sailed with a fleet of hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors, seeking to conquer the kingdom he believed was his by right. After initial victories, he faced the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwinson at Stamford Bridge, and there, on September 25th, Harald Hardrada fell. An arrow pierced his throat, ending the life of the last great Viking king. But this is where the story turns. For what should have followed, a state funeral, a royal tomb, a grave fit for a king, never materialized. Instead, Harold's body disappeared. Contemporary sources, like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and Norse sagas, agree on the place and manner of his death. But what happened afterward is curiously vague. According to some accounts, his body was taken back to Norway. Snorri Sturluson, writing in the 13th century, claims that Harold's remains were eventually returned and interred at the Church of Mary in Nidaros, now modern-day Trondheim. Yet there is no physical evidence, no grave, no coffin, no confirmed relics to support this. And this raises a fundamental question. How could the remains of such a significant figure be lost to history? Logistically, returning a body from England to Norway in the 11th century would have been difficult, but not impossible. Some surviving Vikings did retreat after the battle and could have carried their fallen king home. However, transporting a corpse across the North Sea, particularly one that had already begun to decompose, would have required preservation techniques or rapid movement that were rarely documented or practiced at scale in Norse culture. Furthermore, the location where Harald was supposedly buried, St. Mary's Church, was demolished in the late Middle Ages. Subsequent structures, fires, and urban development have obliterated the site. Even if his grave had existed, any trace may have been erased long ago. Still, the absence of even a tradition or physical marker is strange. Kings of far lesser stature were buried with ceremony and enduring monuments. Why not Harald? One theory suggests that his body was never retrieved at all. In the aftermath of Stamford Bridge, the battlefield was littered with Norse dead. According to sources, only 24 of Harald's original fleet of 300 ships returned to Norway, carrying the survivors. With such heavy losses, recovering his remains may have simply been impossible. Perhaps he was buried in a mass grave with his fallen men, or left to decay on English soil. Yet even this leads to more questions. Would his warriors, known for their fierce loyalty, have allowed their king to go unburied? Would the Anglo-Saxons, fresh from a bloody victory, have disposed of Harald's body in a way befitting a monarch, or in a manner that ensured he would be forgotten? More speculative ideas begin to emerge from these gaps. One legend suggests that Harald was not returned to Trondheim at all, but buried in a secret location along the Norwegian coast, perhaps on an island or within a now-lost church, far from public memory. The motive? To prevent desecration by enemies or rival claimants. Such secret burials are not unheard of in medieval Europe, particularly in cases where martyrdom, dynastic dispute, or foreign conquest threatened the deceased's legacy. Another theory posits that Harald was buried in England, and that his grave lies somewhere near Stamford Bridge, perhaps beneath an unmarked field or even a churchyard now lost to time. Occasional local folklore in the region speaks of the king buried in the earth, but no archaeological evidence has confirmed this. And in recent years, fringe researchers have proposed even stranger ideas, that Harald's body was hidden deliberately to preserve ancient royal lineages, or that his tomb may hold relics that would challenge our understanding of the Viking world. These theories, while unproven and often speculative, tap into a deeper truth. The disappearance of Harald Hardrada's body remains one of medieval Europe's most compelling historical voids. Today, archaeologists continue to search for clues, whether in Trondheim's soil or the quiet countryside around Stamford Bridge. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have hinted at buried anomalies near what may have been the old battlefield. Yet, nothing definitive has emerged. And so, we're left with a ghost. A towering figure of legend, a man who shaped the course of kingdoms, whose death marked the end of the Viking Age, and whose final resting place remains a mystery. Is his body still hidden beneath English soil? Did he return home in death, as he had so many times in life? Or has time itself conspired to erase the traces of his passage from this world? Perhaps somewhere, in an unmarked grave or a forgotten monastery crypt, lies the king who once stormed Constantinople, ruled Norway, and nearly claimed England. Until we find him, or proof that we never will, Harald Hardrada's story remains incomplete. And so, we wonder, what else lies buried beneath the fog of history, waiting to be uncovered? Amid the arid, sun-bleached cliffs of the Judean desert, a hush lingers in the dry air. Pale, rugged slopes cascade into the northern edges of the Dead Sea, where saline waters shimmer under a relentless sun. Here, nestled in the dusty limestone bluffs above Qumran, dozens of caves bore silently into the hillsides, caves that once concealed one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. But not all of them were found. Some are missing, vanished, perhaps stolen, or never revealed at all. What happened to the missing Dead Sea Scrolls? In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd stumbled upon a cave while searching for a lost goat. Inside, he discovered clay jars, tall, narrow, sealed. Within them, brittle scrolls lay wrapped in linen, untouched for nearly 2 millennia. These would soon be identified as part of a vast collection of ancient Jewish texts, some biblical, some apocryphal, others sectarian, belonging to a mysterious desert community many believe to be the Essenes. Over the next decade, scholars and fortune seekers alike descended upon the cliffs of Qumran. 11 caves were officially explored, yielding fragments from approximately 900 manuscripts. The scrolls were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and ranged from well-known biblical books like Genesis and Isaiah to obscure writings such as the War Scroll, the Rule of the Community, and the Copper Scroll, a strange engraved inventory of hidden treasures. But these discoveries, groundbreaking as they were incomplete. Whispers of missing scrolls have haunted the academic world for decades. Early catalogs, black market rumors, and vague accounts from Bedouin informants suggest that more scrolls once existed, scrolls that somehow slipped through the cracks of history. In the chaotic early years of the scroll's discovery, many artifacts were sold privately. Antiquities dealers in Bethlehem and Jerusalem became conduits for smuggling and trade. Some fragments surfaced in clandestine transactions. Others were sold to institutions or collectors under questionable circumstances. Scholars at the time struggled to piece together what was authentic, what had been sold, and, perhaps more troubling, what had never been documented at all. For instance, in Cave 4 alone, thousands of parchment and papyrus fragments were recovered, but in such disarray that even now, some remain unstudied. And then there are the scrolls that were rumored to have been found, only to vanish shortly after. In 1952, the Copper Scroll, discovered in Cave 3, listed over 60 hiding places for gold, silver, and sacred objects, including references to yet more scrolls concealed in caves that may have never been opened. The implication? That other caches of ancient writings might still lie buried beneath layers of stone and silence. Or they might already have been found and hidden away. Some clues are tantalizing. In the 1960s, a prominent scroll researcher, Father Roland Devoe, maintained extensive excavation notes and photographs, many of which were never made public. Later scholars accused his circle of withholding materials either for political reasons or because they had not yet fully translated the texts. Was this mere academic delay or something more? In the years that followed, reports emerged of private collectors claiming to possess unregistered scroll fragments. In 2002, the now defunct Scrollery in Jerusalem began listing fragments for sale, some clearly forgeries, but others more ambiguous. Then in 2017, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. revealed that 5 of its purchased Dead Sea Scrolls were fakes, yet it also claimed ownership of fragments with no clear origin. Could authentic pieces still be hidden in vaults, private homes, or even religious institutions that fear their contents? More speculative theories point to the involvement of intelligence agencies. During the Cold War, the Middle East was a volatile place, riddled with espionage, shifting powers, and proxy wars. Some believe certain scrolls contained information deemed politically sensitive, including interpretations of messianic prophecy that might challenge prevailing religious or national narratives. In such a charged atmosphere, would it have been so far-fetched for texts to be quietly confiscated or buried in classified archives? Even wilder theories suggest that some of the missing scrolls contained forbidden knowledge, apocalyptic visions, alternative versions of scripture, or even references to figures absent from the canonical Bible. While mainstream historians caution against such speculation, the fact remains. There are gaps in the record, and no one can say with certainty what has been lost. And then, there is the desert itself. Remote, harsh, unforgiving. It is entirely possible that more scrolls still lie undiscovered, sheltered in caves beyond Qumran, farther into the cliffs, or beneath layers of rockfall. Modern surveys, including drone and radar mapping, have begun to identify additional potential cave sites, some yet to be explored due to the challenging terrain and political obstacles. In 2017, archaeologists announced the discovery of a new cave, dubbed Cave 12. Though it contained no scrolls, only broken jars and evidence of looting, it offered proof that the story isn't over. The possibility remains that more scrolls are still out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. What might be revealed if they are ever found? New insights into the origins of biblical texts? Forgotten sects of early Judaism? Evidence of how ancient communities viewed law, prophecy, the end of days? Or something else entirely? The Dead Sea Scrolls, in their partial and fragmented state, have already reshaped our understanding of ancient religious life. But the knowledge they represent feels incomplete, like a manuscript missing its final chapter, like a truth half buried. And so, we are left wondering, what happened to the missing scrolls? Were they destroyed, hidden, or stolen? Or are they still lying quietly somewhere beneath the dust of the Judean cliffs, guarded by time, waiting for us to find them? Until that moment arrives, if it ever does, the mystery of the missing Dead Sea Scrolls remains one of the most haunting enigmas of our ancient past. Deep in the heart of northern Germany, where the mist clings low to ancient pine forests and the moorlands seem to whisper with forgotten voices, there lies a region once feared by the legions of Rome. This is the Teutoburg Forest, dense, damp, and tangled with history. Somewhere within this eerie expanse, over 2,000 years ago, 3 Roman legions vanished, along with their standards, the sacred emblems of Roman might. And one of those standards, belonging to Publius Quinctilius Varus, was never recovered. Its fate remains one of Rome's most enduring mysteries. In the year 9 AD, the Roman Empire was expanding ever deeper into the Germanic frontier. The province of Germania Magna, east of the Rhine River, was proving volatile. Varus, a seasoned administrator but arguably unprepared for guerrilla warfare, led the 17th, 9th, and 19th legions into the forest, unaware that a deadly trap had been laid by a chieftain he believed to be an ally, Arminius of the Cherusci tribe. Over several days, through treacherous terrain and relentless ambushes, nearly 20,000 Roman soldiers were annihilated. Few survived to tell the tale. The slaughter was so complete, so humiliating, that Emperor Augustus is said to have cried out in grief, "Quintili vare, legiones rede." Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions. But beyond the loss of manpower and territory, Rome had lost something symbolically far more potent: the legionary eagles. The aquila, or eagle standard, was more than a banner. It was the spiritual heart of a legion. To lose it was to lose honor, identity, and the favor of the gods. In this case, 3 were captured. 2 were eventually recovered many years later through diplomatic maneuvering and military retaliation. But the eagle of the 19th Legion, Varus's standard, was never found. What became of it? Historical sources tell us little. Roman historians such as Tacitus and Cassius Dio describe the disaster in vivid terms, noting the loss of the standards, but they offer no certainty about the fate of the third. What we know is that after the battle, Arminius and his forces desecrated the Roman bodies and likely took the standards as trophies. Did he keep Varus's eagle as a personal symbol of victory? Was it buried with him, hidden in some remote stronghold? Or was it melted down, its sacred form defaced and forgotten. In 15 AD, 6 years after the massacre, Germanicus, nephew of the emperor, led a punitive expedition into Germania. He recovered 2 of the lost eagles, one from the Marsi tribe and another in a later campaign from the Bructeri. But despite scouring the region and defeating multiple Germanic factions, the third standard remained elusive. Was it deliberately hidden? Archaeologists have explored the presumed site of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest near Calcris, where Roman artifacts, sling stones, coins, helmets, and weapon fragments have been uncovered in abundance. The landscape fits the historical descriptions: narrow forest paths, marshy soil, and high embankments. It is here, many believe, that Varus made his last stand, yet no trace of the missing eagle has surfaced. Interestingly, in 2018, German archaeologists discovered a fragment of a Roman standard pole among the remains, but whether it belonged to one of the lost eagles remains speculative. Could the 19 Legion's eagle be lying nearby, deep beneath the soil, beyond the reach of excavation? Or could it have been spirited far from the battlefield? Some theories suggest that Arminius, aware of the eagle's symbolic power, offered it as a token to other tribes, perhaps in distant sanctuaries unknown to Roman pursuers. Could it have been taken northeast, beyond the Elbe River, to the lands of the Suebi, or even into early Slavic territories? Others suggest the eagle was burned as a ritual sacrifice to Germanic gods, a final spiritual rejection of Roman domination. But would Arminius have destroyed such a powerful token, especially when he himself had once served as a Roman officer and knew its value? Then there are more fringe possibilities. Could the standard have been kept hidden by a Germanic cult, its golden form enshrined as a mystical relic of conquest? Legends in some areas of Westphalia and Lower Saxony speak of buried Roman treasures, swords, helmets, coins, and even reference sunbirds hidden in hills. Though largely dismissed as folklore, such tales feed the possibility that someone, at some point, knew more than we do today. Some have gone further still, imagining that the eagle passed into the hands of early Christian sects in Germania, those who may have seen in its image a symbol of imperial prophecy. Others suggest it lies in a forgotten hoard, perhaps near an ancient hill fort or riverbank, waiting for time or chance to bring it into the light. The mystery of the lost eagle of the 19 is not just about a missing object. It is a question of memory, of how civilizations deal with defeat, and of what remnants of the past we choose to seek. Why did Augustus never fully avenge the loss? Why did the search for the eagle not continue beyond Germanicus's campaigns? Could fear of the forest, or the humiliation of the defeat, have cast a psychological shadow? Even Rome dared not penetrate further. And now, over 2,000 years later, might the eagle still rest beneath the roots of an ancient oak, silent, corroded by time, yet waiting? The answer may lie just a few inches below the surface, or forever out of reach. For now, the missing battle standard of Varus remains exactly that, missing, but its absence echoes louder than many things we've found. In the rolling green hills of Trøndelag, where mist lingers across the riverbanks and the wind carries whispers through ancient firs, stands the quiet town of Stiklestad. It is a serene and pastoral place now, a patchwork of farms and churches. But nearly 1,000 years ago, this peaceful valley was the scene of bloodshed, a turning point in Norway's history, where one man's death would ignite legend, sanctity, and controversy that has endured for centuries. The year was 1030. The man was Olaf Haraldsson, later known as Saint Olaf. His end came swiftly on this battlefield. Or so we are told. Olaf was no ordinary king. A former Viking turned Christian ruler, he embodied the complex transition of a region straddling two worlds, the fierce independence of Norse tradition and the rising influence of continental Christianity. After years of exile and failed diplomacy, Olaf returned to Norway to reclaim his throne from rival chieftains and Danish-backed rulers. But as he approached Stiklestad, he was met not by foreign armies, but by his own people. Farmers, petty nobles, and disaffected warriors, many of whom had once served him, stood ready to oppose his return. According to saga sources, Olaf gave a final speech, raised his sword, and led his men into battle. He never left the field. What happened that day is written in multiple chronicles, most notably the Heimskringla, penned by Snorri Sturluson 2 centuries later. They tell us Olaf fought valiantly before falling under a hail of blows, first struck in the leg, then cleaved in the neck, and finally stabbed through the belly by a spear. The details seem precise, and yet questions linger. For one, the exact site of the battle has long been debated. While Stiklestad remains the traditionally accepted location, no definitive archaeological evidence has tied Olaf's final stand to that particular ground. Could the site have been misremembered, or perhaps deliberately relocated in the narratives for symbolic or political purposes? Moreover, the identity of Olaf's killers remains curiously vague. The sagas name a trio of men, Thorir the Hound, Thorir Hund, and Kalv Arnason, as those who struck the fatal blows. But all three would later take different paths in life, some even expressing remorse or ambiguity about their actions. Was Olaf's death truly a martyrdom? Or was it a politically convenient removal, dressed in the garb of sainthood? And then comes the miracle. Only a year after his death, stories began to circulate of wondrous signs at his grave. A blind man was said to have regained his sight after touching the king's bloodied bones. Others claimed healing at the burial site. When Olaf's body was exhumed, witnesses swore it had not decayed, that his cheeks were still ruddy, his hair still soft. Word spread. Pilgrims flocked to Nidaros, present-day Trondheim, where his remains had been moved. Olaf was canonized by Bishop Grimketil in 1031, just 1 year after his death, an unusually rapid declaration of sainthood, and one not formally confirmed by the Pope until much later. But even this raises questions. Was the canonization a genuine recognition of sanctity, or a calculated act by the Church and emerging Norwegian elites to unify the kingdom under a Christian banner? Olaf had failed as a king, but in death, he could succeed as a symbol. And what of the incorrupt body? Such phenomena, while rare, have been recorded elsewhere in Christian history. But could this account have been embellished to bolster a narrative? No known physical remains of Saint Olaf exist today. His shrine was destroyed during the Protestant Reformation, his bones likely scattered or hidden. Yet rumors persist. Some claim that parts of Olaf's body were secreted away by loyal clergy before the shrine was dismantled, perhaps hidden beneath the cathedral, or transported to other parts of Scandinavia. There are relics in churches across Norway and even England that purport to contain fragments of St. Olaf's remains. Are they authentic, or pious forgeries crafted to continue the legend? A more speculative theory suggests that Olaf never died at Stiklestad at all. According to a fringe interpretation of certain Icelandic sagas, Olaf may have fled the battlefield, severely wounded but alive, and lived out his final years in obscurity, possibly in the distant north or abroad in Rus. If this were true, then what of the incorrupt body? Was it someone else's corpse, chosen for political theater? A decoy meant to anchor a myth? The sagas, written centuries later, may have blurred fact with reverence. Could Olaf's story have been retrofitted into the mold of a martyr, a Christ-like king whose death, rather than his reign, would bring salvation? To this day, every July, thousands gather at Stiklestad for Olsok, the festival commemorating Olaf's death. Actors reenact the battle, while pilgrims light candles and recite prayers in his memory. The site remains sacred, infused with a solemnity that speaks to something deeper than just recorded history. But beneath the hymns and historical markers, the mystery endures. What exactly happened on that overcast day in 1030? Was Olaf betrayed by his own people, or sacrificed to secure a Christian kingdom? Did he die a warrior's death, or vanish into legend, only to return in tales of redemption? And where, if anywhere, do his bones rest now? Saint, king, martyr, outlaw. The line between memory and myth is thin in the case of Olaf Haraldsson. And as with many such mysteries, the truth may lie not in what we know, but in what we choose to believe. Somewhere, perhaps beneath stone or story, the final piece waits, quiet, forgotten, but not gone. Beneath the sweltering heat of the Egyptian sun, where the sands shift like whispers across time, a necropolis lies silent. Hidden beneath layers of dust and centuries of forgotten memory, the ancient burial ground of Taposiris Magna guards its secrets. Located west of the Nile Delta, near the shimmering coast of the Mediterranean, this site once thrived as a sacred city during the Greco-Roman period. Its crumbled columns and sun-bleached stone walls now stand like sentinels, bearing witness to mysteries still unspoken. In 2021, archaeologists made a discovery here that sent ripples through the world of Egyptology. From a sealed tomb emerged a body, mummified, decayed, yet resting in its mouth was a gleaming artifact that defied the silence of centuries: a golden tongue. What purpose could such an offering serve? Why craft a tongue of precious metal and place it inside the mouth of the dead? This wasn't a one-time discovery. In the years that followed, additional burials surfaced with similar features: mummified individuals, their real tongues replaced with thin sheets of hammered gold, each shaped precisely to match the contours of a human tongue. Some were found in sarcophagi, others in modest tombs carved into the bedrock. Their condition varied, but the message was the same: speech beyond death mattered. In ancient Egyptian belief, the journey to the afterlife was complex and perilous. The dead would undergo judgment before Osiris, the god of the underworld. To pass into paradise, one needed not only purity of heart, but also the ability to speak truth in the Hall of Two Truths. Without speech, one could not defend oneself. Could these golden tongues be more than offerings? Could they be functional substitutes? Spiritual tools for the dead to speak in the afterlife? This concept aligns with other funerary practices from Egypt's long history. We know of the opening of the mouth ceremony, a sacred rite performed to restore the senses of the deceased, the ability to eat, see, breathe, and speak. The tongue, naturally, was essential to that process. But in these cases, the tongue was not merely symbolically touched or invoked. It was replaced. Could these golden tongues be a physical extension of the spiritual rite? Or were they part of a more secretive cult or belief system, one that has only recently begun to surface? The burial sites in which these artifacts were found date primarily from Egypt's later periods, especially under Greek and Roman influence. This was a time of fusion, when traditional Egyptian beliefs merged with Hellenistic and Roman customs. Taposiris Magna itself is a product of that fusion, with its temple likely dedicated to both Osiris and Greek gods such as Serapis. Could the golden tongues have been part of a localized ritual, practiced only in certain priestly communities, those that believed communication in the afterlife required something more tangible, more incorruptible? Or perhaps the material itself held deeper symbolic power. Gold, in ancient Egyptian theology, was not merely a sign of wealth. It represented divinity, immutable, brilliant, eternal. The flesh of the gods, especially that of Ra, the sun god, was said to be made of gold, If so, then gifting the dead a golden tongue may have been a way of aligning them with divine status, not just enabling them to speak, but to speak as a god. Yet there are more speculative threads that tempt the imagination. Some scholars have proposed that the golden tongues could indicate a class of individuals believed to possess unusual authority or power, priests, oracles, or those tasked with communicating messages between realms. Were these golden-tongued dead chosen for a role beyond their earthly life? Designated speakers in the afterlife, emissaries to the divine? Others entertain the notion of protective measures. If the underworld was a place of judgment and danger, perhaps these tongues were a way of defending the soul, ensuring it could recite the necessary incantations, the negative confession, and the sacred words found in the Book of the Dead. Without the tongue, the soul would be silent, vulnerable, lost. There's also a more modern mystery. Many of these golden tongues have been discovered only recently. Why were they unknown to us for so long? Were they simply buried in remote or neglected tombs? Or have many more been unearthed in the past century, only to disappear into private collections, quietly sold, undocumented? How many more of these artifacts are hidden, tucked inside sealed sarcophagi or buried beneath city ruins not yet touched by modern excavations? And if we were to find them, what other accompanying symbols or writings might offer a key to understanding? As the golden tongues continue to surface in scattered locations, primarily in Lower Egypt, along the Mediterranean edge, a pattern begins to emerge, though faint and incomplete. They appear in burials of differing status, hinting that the practice was neither strictly elite nor widely popular. This ambiguity only deepens the mystery. Why did this tradition flourish in this particular region, during this particular era? Was it passed down quietly among certain priests, or encoded in esoteric texts lost to time? No inscriptions accompany the tongues, no hieroglyphs etched into their surface to explain their purpose. They are silent in a way that is almost poetic, tongues of gold, meant to speak, but giving away no secrets. Today, these artifacts lie in museums, or locked away in research facilities, their purpose still debated. They are objects of beauty, certainly, but also of silence, precisely because they were meant to overcome it. What, then, are we to make of them? Were these golden tongues gifts for gods, talismans for speech, or protective tools meant to defy the silence of death itself? Or were they part of a now lost spiritual technology, one that believed the soul needed not only prayers, but instruments to survive the crossing from life into eternity? In the end, the sands of Egypt have preserved the metal, but not the message. Somewhere, perhaps still buried beneath the ochre dust of Taposiris Magna, or resting silently in a yet undisturbed tomb, lies a fuller answer. But until then, the golden tongues speak only in mystery.